Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Alright, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. When I was around 10, there was this one night that still sticks with me. It was summer, and we were staying in my grandparents' place. That house was old but big, with a wide porch, a huge backyard, and enough space for all of us cousins to pile in without stepping on each other. That night, all the adults, our parents, aunts, uncles, and grandparents, had gone out to dinner together. They'd been planning it for a while, a kind of rare adult-only night, so they left us kids at the house. There were about 10 of us, all siblings and cousins, ranging from maybe 6 to 16 years old. The older ones were kind of in charge, but mostly we were just left to ourselves. We were all gathered in the living room. The TV was on, playing some movies. We had gone through a comedy and were halfway through an action movie when it happened. We had the lights off, snacks spread across the coffee table, and blankets thrown everywhere. It was loud in the way a room full of kids always is. Someone laughing too hard, someone shouting at the screen, someone whispering something to someone else, and giggling. It was just regular kid chaos. But then everything shifted. It started with this low rumble that seemed to come from the floor. At first, I thought it was something in the movie, but the floor actually shook under me. It wasn't huge like an earthquake, but it was strong enough to make the cups on the table rattle and the windows hum for a second. And then there was this flash, a blinding white flash like lightning, but brighter, and it came from the backyard. It lit up the entire living room for a split second like it was midday. Then the sound followed. It wasn't thunder. It was a boom, deep and sharp like something had exploded. The glass in the windows vibrated with it. My stomach dropped, and I remember jumping to my feet without even thinking. All of us screamed at the same time. Nobody had to say anything. We just ran. As one big clump, we bolted out of the living room and into the hallway. It was like pure panic. No one tripped or stopped. We just moved like animals when they get startled. The hallway was narrow and dark, and we packed into it, breathing hard. The older cousins stood in front of us, trying to figure out what to do. I remember how their faces looked, wide-eyed, pale, confused. One of them had their phone out and was saying they should call the police. Another said to wait and call the parents first. They argued quietly for a few minutes, but no one moved from the hallway. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wasn't even thinking about what it could be. I just knew something was wrong. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't fireworks. It didn't feel like anything we'd experienced before. It felt like something had gone wrong in the world, and we didn't know what it was. After maybe 10 minutes of standing there, still packed into that hallway like sardines, one of the older cousins finally stepped out and looked around. Nothing. The lights in the house were still on. Nothing else had shaken. There were no more sounds. But that tension, that raw fear, hadn't left us. Eventually, one by one, we followed back into the living room. This time we were cautious, moving slowly, scanning every shadow. Someone grabbed the fireplace poker. Another one picked up a tennis racket. My little brother clutched a kitchen knife he'd grabbed from the drawer. We didn't feel safe, but it felt worse just hiding in the hallway. We turned the lights on, locked all the doors and windows, and sat together on the floor instead of the couches, backs to the walls, facing the sliding glass door that looked out into the backyard. The curtains were still open, and the yard looked normal in the dark, silent, still, nothing out of place. But we all saw it. We all felt it. That boom wasn't imagined. That flash lit up the entire house. It wasn't a dream or a trick of the light. We started talking about it in hushed voices. One cousin said it might have been a transformer blowing up, but another pointed out there hadn't been a power outage. Everything still worked. Someone else said maybe it was a plane or something crashing nearby, but we would have heard more, sirens, people, something. There was nothing, just that one explosion of light and sound and then silence. We stayed like that for another half hour. None of us moved from that spot. Then the headlights of a car lit up the front window, and we all jumped again. Our parents were back. They came in laughing and chatting, but when they saw us sitting on the floor with makeshift weapons and wide, terrified eyes, their faces changed. We tried to explain what had happened, how the house shook, the flash, the sound, but they didn't see anything. They stepped out into the backyard with flashlights and looked around. Nothing. The grass wasn't burned. There was no hole, no fallen tree, no signs of anything. The neighbors didn't say anything either. No one else in the area seemed to have seen or heard a thing. They told us we must have imagined it or exaggerated it because we were alone and watching loud movies. But we didn't imagine it. Not all 10 of us. We all reacted at the exact same moment. You don't run in terror from nothing. The next morning, we checked again. We walked through the backyard in daylight. It was completely normal. Nothing smelled burnt, nothing broken, no sign anything had happened. One of my older cousins joked that maybe it was aliens or something, but no one laughed. Years passed. We grew up, went to high school, college, moved on with life. But every time we're together, weddings, holidays, whatever, that night always comes up. Remember the boom? Someone will say, and we all go quiet for a moment. Every one of us still remembers it exactly the same. The rumble, the flash, the sound, the way we ran like a herd of animals, the way we couldn't explain it. Some of us have tried to find explanations over the years. Underground gas pockets, military testing, sonic booms, electrical issues, but nothing fits. There were no reports of anything happening that night in the area. We checked news sites, local reports, even Reddit forums. Nothing. It was like it never happened, except we all know it did. To this day, I've never felt fear like that again. I've had close calls, bad days, the usual stuff life throws at you, but nothing compares to that night. Because whatever it wasn't just scary. It was the complete unknown. And we were just kids sitting in a living room when the world cracked open for a moment and then slammed shut again without leaving a trace. That night still comes back to me sometimes, usually when it's dead quiet and I'm alone in a room. I remember how it felt when the floor shook and the windows buzzed and my brain screamed that something was happening, something I didn't understand. And the worst part is there's no ending to it. No explanation. Just that moment, frozen in time, still as terrifying today as it was back then. Mount Hood had always felt like one of those safe places. It was close enough to home in Eugene to feel familiar, but far enough into the wilderness that it offered the kind of quiet you couldn't get in the city. Nate and I had driven up there for day hikes before, packed lunches, scenic views, a quick reset from normal life. But we never stayed overnight, never gone deep into the parts of the forest where the trail signs stopped showing up. When we saw the listing for the cabin, it felt like the perfect way to disappear for a few days. The ad described it as rustic, off-grid, surrounded by forest, with no neighbors for miles. The pictures were few, just a couple blurry shots of a small wooden structure half hidden by trees. It was cheap, almost too cheap, but we didn't ask too many questions. The owner only communicated through email. Short responses, just directions and a vague promise that everything we need would be there. His last message included a warning. We'd lose all cell service after rhododendron. That sounded perfect to us at the time. No calls, no work emails, no distractions. Just the two of us in the woods. We packed light, just enough food for a couple nights, warm clothes, flashlights, a small camp stove in case the wood-burning one didn't work. The drive was easy until we passed government camp. From there, the roads narrowed, the signs got more faded, and eventually we were on a dirt track so overgrown with weeds and low branches that we had to roll up the windows to stop them from whipping our faces. The path curved endlessly, going deeper into thick woods that didn't look like they'd been disturbed in years. After almost an hour of crawling forward in the car, we stopped. The road narrowed too much to drive any farther. We pulled over next to a cluster of thick, old-growth trees and got out. It was dead quiet. No wind, no birds. We had to walk the last stretch with our bags slung over our shoulders, stepping over roots and mud, pushing past saplings and hanging moss. When we saw the cabin, I remember my stomach tightening a little. I don't know why. It wasn't scary at first, just wrong somehow. It looked even older than in the pictures. Heavy logs made up the walls, with moss climbing up from the earth halfway to the windows. The glass was dark, smeared with years of grime and maybe soot. There was a pump out front, rusted and leaning slightly to one side. The wooden steps to the porch creaked under our weight. Nate looked back at me, trying to be upbeat, keys in hand. When he opened the door, the air hit us immediately, damp, old, earthy like wet bark and forgotten spaces. It wasn't filthy inside, but it didn't feel lived in either. Everything was wood chairs, a table, a wide old stove that smelled faintly of smoke. Heavy blankets were folded over the backs of chairs. On the table was a leather guest book, warped and spotted with mold. I flipped through it, pages sticking together. The most recent entry was dated July 1991. It was just a single sentence. Enjoy your stay. There was nothing else. That night we sat out on the porch around a fire Nate had built in the stone ring outside. The sky turned deep blue, the stars starting to peek through. At first it was everything we hoped for. The wine warmed us, and the woods were quiet in that way that makes you feel like the only people left in the world. We were halfway through second glass when something shifted. I don't even remember what changed exactly. It might have been the way Nate suddenly stopped talking. I looked over and saw him staring toward the trees. His grip on the glass had gone tight, and he set it down slowly. He didn't say anything at first, just kept squinting toward the woods. Then he muttered, "Someone's out there." I turned and followed his gaze. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the firelight, a figure was standing. Not walking, not moving, just standing, too far away to make out anything but the outline. Human, upright, still. I remember my mouth went dry instantly. Nate stood up slowly and grabbed the flashlight, flicking it on and aiming it directly where the figure had been. There was nothing there. The trees looked empty. No sound, no movement, just the crackle of the fire and our own breathing. Neither of us spoke for a while. I think we both knew something wasn't right, but we were trying to stay calm, trying to rationalize it. By the time we went inside, locked the door, and pulled the old blanket over us in the bed, the sense of calm was gone. Every creak of the cabin made me sit up. Every gust of wind tapping branches against the roof made me think of footsteps. Nate didn't sleep either. I could hear his breathing all night. The next morning we pretended we were fine. We boiled water on the stove and made weak coffee. Nate walked out to the tree line where we'd seen the figure. He came back looking pale. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to show someone had stood there. We kept ourselves busy during the day, hiking small loops around the area, always staying within sight of the cabin. We didn't talk about the night before. That afternoon, we came across something strange. A thin wire, rusted and brittle, nailed into a tree about shoulder height. It disappeared into the brush on both sides. It looked old, like something from a different time. A boundary marker maybe, but for what, we didn't know. Nate stared at it longer than I did. On the way back, he kept looking over his shoulder. We lit the fire early that evening. Shadows crept up the trees fast. As the sun sank, the woods went dark faster than the night before. And then it happened again. The figure returned. This time, closer. Not at the tree line anymore. Maybe 70 yards away. Still not moving. Still watching. Nate had binoculars in the backpack. He pulled them out and looked through, holding them steady for a long time. When he handed them to me, he didn't say anything. My hands were shaking as I focused them. The figure was clearer now, dressed in something dark, the shape of a uniform, maybe tattered, dirty. Not military, not police, something older. And the way it stood, it was wrong. Too stiff, too deliberate. We agreed silently that we would leave at first light. We started packing as soon as it got light enough to see. Nate walked to the car ahead of me and opened the hood. I could tell something was wrong by the way he froze. The battery was dead, not from age or cold. The terminals were unscrewed. Someone had done it on purpose. Nate tried reconnecting it, but it was too drained. We had no choice. We had to walk out. We set out quickly, walking fast down the dirt road. After a while, we started noticing them, small piles of pine needles, perfectly spaced, every 50 feet or so, clean piles freshly stacked. We passed at least 10 of them. It wasn't random. It was a path, or a signal. We kept walking. Eventually, we found a sign nailed to a tree, old and almost unreadable. It said, "Do not trespass. Property of U.S. Forest Service. Site 17A." Neither of us had heard of that before. We stood there staring at it, trying to decide what to do. In the end, we turned back. Something about the sign felt wrong. It wasn't on any maps. The forest felt like it was closing in. That night back in the cabin, we didn't sleep. We heard scratching along the walls, slow dragging sounds. At one point, Nate looked out the side window and saw footprints in the dirt. Fresh ones. They led away from the house, heels deep like someone had stood there for a while. On the windowsill was an old Forest Service badge, rusted, placed there carefully. At dawn, we ran. We moved fast, barely stopping. Eventually, we saw headlights. A truck, Forest Service logo on the side. We sprinted toward it, waving our arms. The man who stepped out looked like he'd seen things. He didn't smile, just asked if we were lost. We told him about the cabin, the figure, the badge. He listened quietly, then told us the truth. The cabin hadn't been rented in over 30 years. It was condemned in 1992. A ranger named Jenkins had killed a couple he thought were trespassing, then killed himself. The site was never reopened. The badge matched the man from the photo he showed us. Nate and I sat silently in the truck, the weight of it all crashing down on us. We gave our statements. They said they'd investigate, but we knew they didn't believe us. Back home in Eugene, a few days later, I got a message from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. It was of Nate and me, taken through the cabin window. The angle was low, like the person had crouched just outside the glass. The caption below read, "Nice to finally see you up close." We moved a few months later, changed numbers, got a place in a city far from the woods. But I still don't sleep well, because whoever was out there, they weren't just watching. They're still watching. It's been 6 months since David died. Half a year of silence that felt louder than anything I'd ever known. Not the kind of silence where there's peace or space to think. It was the kind that buzzes in your bones, thick with all the words that never got said and all the ones we tried and failed to say. Chloe and I had barely spoken since the funeral. When we did, it felt like talking through a wall of static. David used to be the bridge between us. When he was around, he made everything easier. He had this way of laughing that disarmed everyone. He could make me loosen up and could get Chloe to come down from whatever cloud she lived on. With him gone, it was like two pieces of a puzzle that used to fit, just barely now couldn't even sit in the same box. I booked the cabin because I thought maybe we needed something neutral. Not our childhood home, not my apartment filled with blueprints and coffee cups, and not our messy studio filled with sculptures and charcoal sketches. Just something away from all of it. The Ozark National Forest seemed like a good idea when I clicked confirm on the booking. Somewhere honest, quiet, maybe in the woods, away from cell signals and memory triggers. We could start again. The road to the cabin was a winding, narrow thing, and the last stretch was barely passable. My sedan creaked over every bump. The red dirt kicked up behind us in long, dry plumes. Trees arched overhead, thick old oaks and hickories. They blocked out most of the afternoon light, so even though it was just after 4, everything looked dim and green and close. I gripped the wheel tighter than I needed to. My eyes scanned the woods, even though I didn't know what I was looking for. The GPS had lost signal 10 minutes ago, so I was relying on a set of printed directions the owner emailed me. A novelty these days. Chloe sat beside me, sketchbook on her lap, headphones in her ears. She hadn't looked up since we left the highway 2 hours ago. "Are we there yet?" she asked, her voice flat. She didn't pull out her earbuds. "Almost," I said. I tried to sound light. He said to look for a carved sign, "Still water." The cabin appeared suddenly, like it had been hiding until the last second. It sat in a rough clearing surrounded by trees that looked older than anything I'd ever seen. The building itself was small, smaller than the pictures made it seem. Dark logs stacked tight, chinked with crumbly gray mortar. It looked like it had been there forever. It didn't feel like someone built it. It felt like it had grown there. I got out of the car and walked a slow circle around it, my mind ticking away, roof slope, drainage issues, foundation. I couldn't help it. That's how my brain worked. Inside, the place smelled like smoke and wetwood. There was only one room, open and dark, with a stone fireplace that took up most of one wall. A tiny kitchen area in one corner, a couple of beds built into the walls, and a round wooden table in the middle. No TV, no microwave, no distractions. The windows were small and deep set, and the door creaked like something out of an old movie. I said, "Well, it's authentic," and ran a hand over the rough wood mantel. Chloe finally looked up. Her eyes, so much like David's, took in a room. She smiled a little, a faint thing, and whispered, "It's perfect." That first day was fine. We hiked one of the trails nearby, a 5-mile loop, mostly uphill. It was hot and steep and quiet. We didn't talk much, but we didn't fight either. At the top, there was a lookout point with a view that stretched across rolling green hills and valleys. She sat there, sketching the trees. For the first time since he died, I didn't feel like I was suffocating. That night, we made tea and sat on the porch. I expected the forest to be alive with sound, bugs, owls, whatever else lived out here, but around sunset, everything stopped. It was like someone hit mute on the whole world. No crickets, no wind, nothing. Just this heavy, dense stillness. I tried to brush it off. The second night, it happened again. The stillness came earlier and heavier. We sat in the same chairs, cups of tea cooling in our hands. Then, from the woods, came a sound. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was slow, like stone dragging over stone. It moved from the edge of the trees, along the clearing's edge. Deliberate, not hurried, like it knew exactly where it was going. And it didn't care if we heard it. I told myself it was an animal, a deer, something harmless. But that sound, stone on stone, it didn't fit. It didn't belong in the forest. That night, we locked the door and pushed a chair under the knob. Neither of us said it out loud, but we were scared. I slept in my clothes, flashlight in my hand. I didn't really sleep. On the third day, the air felt wrong. Heavy, charged. I couldn't focus on anything. Chloe didn't want to leave the cabin, and I didn't push her. But the stillness came early, and the scraping started again, earlier and louder. It wasn't at the edge of the woods anymore. It was in the clearing. Scrape, scrape. I grabbed the flashlight, told myself I needed to know what it was. I walked toward the tree line. The beam shook in my hand. At the edge of the clearing, I pointed the light at the ground and froze. 2 deep parallel gouges ran through the soil, a foot apart, cutting into the dirt and limestone. Fresh, like something with 2 massive, sharp, heavy limbs that dragged itself forward, then back. We didn't sleep that night. The scraping started again. Only this time, it came from the porch. Each scrape was louder, closer, vibrating through the floor. Then came a new sound, a low, grinding press against the logs of the cabin wall. Slow, testing, like it was figuring out how strong the structure was. I moved to the window. I looked. It wasn't an animal, not even close. It was huge, hunched, covered in what looked like wet black stones, moss, thick roots. No face, no eyes, no mouth, just this massive shape moving slow and heavy like a glacier. One of its limbs, a thick, jagged piece of rock, dragged across the wood, deliberate, like it was thinking. I backed away, then it moved to the door. The first push was soft, just enough to make the hinges groan. Then harder. Wood cracked, dust fell from the beams. Chloe remembered something. The map. There was a fire tower miles away. The old logging trail ran from near our cabin out to it. If we could get there, we'd be high off the ground. Visible, maybe even reachable by radio. We used the noise at the front door to cover our escape. The kitchen window was stuck, but we forced it open. Chloe went out first. Then I followed. We didn't look back. We ran. The forest was pitch black. We tripped, fell, got back up. I twisted my ankle. Sharp pain lanced up my leg, but I didn't stop. We found a trail by luck. 2 faint grooves in the earth, mostly overgrown. But they were there. We followed them. For hours, we ran. And then we saw it. A shape against the early dawn sky. Thin and metal. The fire tower. We climbed. The steps groaned. One slipped under me. I nearly fell, but we reached the top. We got inside, and we waited. The sun rose, and with it came the sounds of the forest. Birds, wind, insects. It was the most beautiful noise I'd ever heard. That day, we made the decision. We weren't going back to the cabin. Not for our things. Not for the car. Nothing was worth walking through those woods again. We followed the trail to the road. Hours later, a ranger picked us up. We said a bear destroyed the cabin. He nodded, took notes, dropped us off in town. We left Arkansas that same day. We never heard from the sheriff. Now, months later, Chloe is working again. She makes strange welded sculptures that don't look like anything you'd put in a gallery, but they're hers. I'm back to designing buildings. Steel, concrete, things that make sense. We talk now, but we never talk about that night, because we know what we saw, and we know it's still out there, waiting, still, silent, just beyond the edge of the clearing. My friend Lily has a cabin on a lake in Washington. It's tucked back in the trees, about a 10-minute drive from the nearest town, and surrounded by dense forest with only a few other cabins nearby, most of them only used in the summer. That year, we were 15. Lily had invited me and her cousin Evan to spend a week with her at the cabin during the summer. It had been a great few days, sunny, quiet, the kind of peaceful that makes you forget about phones and clocks and everything else. We swam, went canoeing, played board games when it rained, and fished in the lake almost every evening. It was the kind of summer break you think about when you're older and wish you could relive. On our last night, like we had done the previous evenings, we grabbed our fishing gear and walked to the lake. The path to the lake was a short 5-minute walk from the cabin. It started as a small paved trail where people jogged or walked their dogs during the day. It had a few wooden benches along the way and connected to another trail that led to a more public beach. But we never went to that beach. Instead, we went to our own quiet little spot, a secluded, hard-to-reach part of the shoreline with no official trail to it. To get there, we had to veer off the main path, climb over a log, push through some brush, and then go down a steep hill that was slippery with pine needles and rocks. It was easier going down than up. Coming back meant using our hands and feet to climb the steep incline. But the spot was beautiful. No other people, just the sound of water lapping against the rocks and trees rustling above us. That evening, we got there around 7. The sun was just starting to dip behind the tree line, casting long shadows across the lake. The air was cooler than it had been all day, but still warm enough to sit comfortably. We didn't catch much that night, just a couple small fish we tossed back. Mostly we just sat on a log near the water, talking about school and summer and whatever random things came up. None of us had our phones with us. I remember feeling calm, like the kind of quiet you don't even realize you need it until you're in it. At some point, maybe around 8:30, I looked around and realized how dark it had gotten. It wasn't pitch black, but it was definitely darker than I had expected. The lake had this odd way of making time feel like it moved slower, or maybe just made you forget to check the time at all. I told Lily and Evan that we should probably head back. They agreed, and we packed up our gear, bait box, rods, the small cooler with snacks, and started heading up the hill. It was harder in the dark. I slipped once and caught myself with my knee, getting it covered in dirt and leaves. We didn't talk much as we climbed, which I remember now as feeling kind of strange. Usually someone would be joking or complaining, but this time it was just quiet. Maybe we were all just tired. When we reached the trail again, I made a comment about how creepy it felt at night. I half joked that it felt like something out of a scary movie. That's when Evan decided to make it worse. He started talking about a story he'd read about mountain men from the 60s, some kind of weird cult that supposedly lived in the woods and did awful things to hikers and campers. He said they were murderers and that people still talked about seeing them every now and then. I didn't believe him, obviously, but I still told him to shut up. The way he told the story was too casual, and in the dark, it stuck with me more than I wanted it to. Then, out of nowhere, Evan stopped. He was ahead of us by just a few steps and suddenly froze. At first, I thought he was messing with us again, but when I saw his face, I knew he wasn't playing. He looked genuinely scared. Lily told him to stop being stupid and kept walking, so I followed her, but then Evan grabbed both of our arms hard and made us look where he was looking. I didn't see anything at first, just trees and shadows. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw what he had seen. There was a man, or at least it looked like a man. He was big, tall, broad shoulders, wearing what looked like dark, dirty clothes. He was stumbling a little as he walked, slowly but definitely toward us. He wasn't calling out, or waving or anything like that. Just walking, staggering, straight in our direction from the woods to the side of the trail. At first, I thought maybe he was drunk or hurt, but something about the way he moved didn't sit right. There was no flashlight, no sign he'd been hiking, no backpack. Just this silent figure moving through the trees like he knew exactly where we were. We all panicked. We didn't say a word. We just turned and ran. The rest of the climb was steep, and we were practically crawling to get up the hill. I slipped again and cut my hand on a rock, but I didn't stop. I looked back once and I saw him again. He was closer, definitely moving faster than he had been before. Not running exactly, but quicker than before. I don't think he said a single word. Just moved toward us with his arms swinging stiffly by his sides. We finally got to the top and sprinted the last stretch of trail. The trees opened up near the road that ran in front of the cabin, and I remember my lungs burning and my heart pounding so hard I could barely think. We didn't stop until we were at the front porch. We dropped our stuff on the deck and realized the front door was locked. Lily and Evan immediately started banging out the family's secret knock. It was this complicated rhythm they used to make sure it was someone they knew at the door. I stood with my back to the woods, just staring, expecting to see the man come out of the trees at any second. But nothing came. Nobody followed. Lily's uncle opened the door and let us in. All three of us were out of breath and borderline hysterical. We told the adults everything. Her uncle and mom said it was probably just a hiker or someone who got lost, but none of us believed that. It didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like someone who wanted help. It felt wrong, off. That night, Lily and I went downstairs to the walkout basement where we slept. It wasn't creepy. There were big windows and a door to the backyard, almost like another floor of the house. We were still a bit shaken, but it felt safer with everyone home. We got into pajamas and tried to calm down, talking quietly about how maybe we had just scared ourselves. Then we heard it, the knock, the exact same family knock, that complicated rhythm, but it wasn't on the door upstairs. It was at the window. We froze. Neither of us said a word. The window was just a few feet from the bunk beds. We didn't dare look. We just sat there, wide-eyed, listening. Then it happened again. Same rhythm, but this time a little faster. Like whoever was doing it was more frantic. I don't even remember standing up. We just ran. We bolted up the stairs and into the living room where Lily's family and Evan were still awake. We were in full panic mode. We told them through tears what we heard. Evan's face went pale. He went downstairs to check. When he came back, he said it was definitely the knock. Lily's uncle, older cousin, and her brother grabbed flashlights and headed outside. A few minutes later, we heard the knock again, this time on the front door. Then again. It happened 3 times before Lily's uncle came back inside and called the police. The knock stopped shortly after the call. No more windows, no more doors. When the police arrived, they searched the area around the cabin with their flashlights. They didn't find anyone. We told them everything. The man on the trail, the knocking, the window. The officer said it was probably just someone trying to scare us. But what stuck with me the most was that knock. It wasn't something you could guess. It was weirdly specific, and someone outside had repeated it perfectly. We didn't sleep much that night. All 3 of us ended up sleeping in the living room together, lights on. Every sound outside made me flinch. The next morning, we packed up early and left. That was the last time I ever stayed at that cabin. Lily went back with her family the next summer, but I couldn't do it. I still think about that knock. Whoever it was, they weren't lost. They weren't drunk. They weren't confused. They were trying to get in. Back in 2004, I was a 17-year-old country girl who had just moved to the city for college. I'd grown up in a small town where people left their doors unlocked. Everyone waved at each other, and the most dangerous thing I'd ever encountered was a cranky dog 2 streets over. I thought I was tough, though. I thought I could handle anything. That was the first year I ever lived away from home. The first year, I had no curfew, no parents checking in on me, no small-town routine to follow. I had freedom, and I was completely, stupidly convinced I knew how to use it. It was a Saturday night, and I had gone out with a few people from my dorm, some upperclassmen who knew the city way better than I did. We'd all hung out at a friend of a friend's apartment. Nothing wild, just loud music and cheap pizza, and a lot of laughing. At around 1 in the morning, people started either crashing on the couch or calling cabs. I didn't really know anyone that well, and I wasn't about to pass out on a stranger's floor, so I figured I'd walk back to my dorm. It didn't seem like that far on the map. I had a terrible flip phone with almost no battery and no data plan, and I hadn't really memorized the directions back, but I figured I'd recognize something eventually. The minute I stepped outside, I knew I'd made a bad call. The streets were dead quiet. Most of the storefronts were shuttered up, and the sidewalks were empty. I kept telling myself that it was fine, just a quiet part of the city late at night. But with every block I walked, things got worse. The streetlights started thinning out. Some were flickering like they were about to die. Others were already dark. There was broken glass on the sidewalks, trash spilling out of overstuffed bins, and more than once I heard yelling coming from inside these old, broken-down row houses lining the street. One had a boarded-up window and a door that looked like it had been kicked in more than once. I started to realize I had no idea where I was. The streets weren't familiar, and none of the buildings looked like anything I'd seen before. There was this heavy silence between bursts of shouting or distant sirens. It was the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, like the whole street is watching you, but nobody's saying anything. I kept walking, trying to stay calm, but I was speeding up without meaning to. My heartbeat was in my throat, and I was gripping my little purse like it had something worth stealing in it. I passed a row of rusted-out cars and kept my head down, trying not to look scared even though every part of me was screaming. I just wanted to make it back. I didn't even care if I had to walk another mile. Then I heard it, a car engine behind me. Slow, too slow. I turned slightly and saw a dark sedan creeping up behind me, keeping pace. It was barely idling forward, like they were matching my steps on purpose. I didn't look too long. I didn't want to give them a reason, but I caught a glance. 5 guys inside. All men. None of them looked like someone I want to run into in the middle of the day, much less right then. My stomach dropped. I couldn't think. My legs kept walking, but my brain was frozen. I crossed to the other side of the street without turning my head. They followed. Same speed, same distance, just following me. I was coming up on an intersection. Maybe the next street could lead me to somewhere better lit or more familiar. But just as I reached the corner, the car sped up, made a sharp left turn, and stopped. Right in front of me, they blocked the sidewalk, just parked sideways across the lane like they owned the street. The front windows were down now. I didn't hear what they said. Maybe they weren't even saying anything yet. I wasn't listening. I stopped walking. I stood right there on the cracked sidewalk and stared at the car, my feet locked to the ground. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't do it. My knees were shaking. I couldn't even breathe right. I remember thinking very clearly, this is it. This is how something really bad starts. There were 5 of them. There was one of me. Nobody else was around. Not a single moving car. Not a single person on the sidewalk. I don't know how long I stood there like that. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe more. It felt like forever. Then something completely ordinary, something stupidly simple, happened. The porch light in the house, just past the car, flipped on. A bare yellow bulb lit up a narrow set of concrete steps. I glanced over and saw this man, probably in his 30s, stepping out of the door with a bag of trash. He didn't look at me at first. He didn't even look at the car. Just came out and started walking toward his trash bin like it was the most normal thing in the world. The car peeled out. The tires screeched as they suddenly accelerated down the street and disappeared around the next corner. They didn't say anything. They didn't even hesitate. Just gone. I couldn't hold it together anymore. My knees gave out a little, and I grabbed onto a fence to steady myself. The man looked up at that point, finally see me just standing there, tears running down my face. He didn't rush or freak out, just walked over slowly and asked if I was okay. I couldn't even answer him at first. I was shaking so bad I couldn't get a full sentence out. He didn't push me, just gestured his house and said something like, "Come inside for a second." I followed him because honestly, I didn't know what else to do. I sat down at this tiny kitchen table while he poured me a soda and got me a paper towel to wipe my face. The place was small, a little cluttered, smelled faintly like smoke and fried food. His roommate came out, a shorter guy with a big beard, and the 2 of them just let me talk. I didn't even make sense for the first couple minutes. Just kept saying I didn't know where I was and they were following me. Eventually, I calmed down enough to explain what dorm I lived in. The two of them offered to walk me back, and even though I didn't know them, I agreed without hesitation. I wasn't about to be out on the street alone again. We walked together, the three of us, down better lit streets this time. They made sure to keep a casual pace, never crowding me, never talking too much. Just two normal guys who happened to be in the right place at the right time. When we finally reached the front gate of my dorm, they didn't make a big deal out of it. Just said they were glad I was okay. One of them mentioned they did stand-up comedy at some bar downtown and said I should come check it out sometime. I laughed and told them I wasn't even 18 yet. And that was it. I never saw them again. Never caught their names. I don't remember the name of the street or even how far I'd wander off course. But I remember the porch light. I remember the scraping sound of the trash bag dragging on the sidewalk. I remember how fast that car disappeared the second someone else appeared. It took me weeks to stop flinching when I heard slow cars behind me after that. I never walked anywhere alone that late again, especially not in a city I didn't understand. I told myself over and over how lucky I had been. Because I was. I really was. It's hard to think about what might have happened if that man hadn't stepped outside just then. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. I try not to let my brain go down that road too far. I just know that one totally normal, random moment changed the entire night. A guy taking out the trash might have saved my life, and I'll never forget that. So I'm just now writing this story, only hours after the most insane moment of my entire life. I know that might sound dramatic, and maybe in a few days I'll feel the same way, but right now my hands are still shaking. My stomach hasn't stopped twisting since it happened. My heart feels like it's sitting in my throat. I keep looking over my shoulder, expecting to see her again, that woman with the wild hair and the rose tattoo. Every sound in the woods around our campsite makes me jump. I keep telling myself it's over, we're safe, but the truth is, I'm not sure I'll relax anytime soon. Still, I want to write everything down before it starts to fade or twist in my head. It's all still fresh, so here goes. Late last night, my wife and I packed up the truck for a week-long camping trip with our kids. We've been looking forward to this for months. It will be the first time taking our two kids with us. They're finally old enough to manage without electronics, and we thought it would be a perfect chance for us to bond as a family, show them the beauty of nature, teach them how to fish, build a fire, all that good stuff. Over the years, my wife and I have camped all across the state, sometimes in national parks, sometimes just off some trail on a map. This spot was a new one, remote, out near a lake, with no cell service for miles in any direction. We left just after midnight. It wasn't ideal, but I had to finish a late shift at work, and we didn't want to lose a whole day of our trip. The kids were giddy with excitement, climbing into the back seat with their blankets and backpacks full of snacks and coloring books. My wife brought coffee for me, knowing I'd be driving through the night. We had music going for the first couple hours. Everyone was laughing, joking, passing around gummy bears, and then one by one, they all dozed off. The music faded, and eventually it was just me and the road and one of my audiobooks playing low through the speakers. The highway was empty, and there weren't many lights once we got off the main roads. I've been driving in silence for a while when the truck suddenly jolted to the right. At first I thought I'd hit a bump, but the steering fell off. It took me a second to realize the tire had blown. I fought to keep the truck from sliding too far off the road. It wasn't a major accident, nothing crazy, but the wheel pulled so hard that I skidded onto the gravel shoulder before I could get control again. Somehow, unbelievably, no one woke up. My wife stirred for a second, but when I glanced over, she was already back asleep. I got out of the truck, keeping the door cracked so the interior light wouldn't wake anyone. The air outside was cold, and the sky was pitch black, except for the faint blue of the moon behind some clouds. I walked around to the back and started moving bags around to get to the spare tire. I was annoyed, but figured I'd be back on the road in 20 minutes max. Still, something felt weird. I had this uncomfortable feeling like someone was nearby. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was the quiet or the fact that I was alone in the dark with my family unconscious in the truck. But it was more than that. Something felt wrong. I had just finished removing the flat and was tightening the lug nuts on the spare when I heard a soft sound behind me. A throat being cleared. Light polite. I thought it was my wife at first. Maybe she'd woken up and come to check on me. I stood up and turned around, expecting to see her in her sweatshirt and pajama pants. Instead, there was a stranger standing 10 feet from me on the shoulder of the road. She was small, maybe 5'3", with wild, tangled dreadlocks that looked like they hadn't been washed in a long time. She wore a heavy coat that hung awkwardly on her shoulders. Her skin was pale and dirty, and right in the center of her neck was a tattoo of a rose. Not a colorful one, just black ink, simple lines, and thorns curling along the stem. She was barefoot. That's the thing that threw me off the most, even more than her sudden appearance. She was standing there, calmly, on the cold gravel with no shoes. She smiled in a strange way, not threatening exactly, but too calm, too confident, like she'd been waiting, like she knew I'd be there. She said her name was Summer. Her voice was almost soft, like she was trying to sound kind, like she was trying to sound like someone you trust. She offered to help. I told her no, that I was fine, just changing a tire and almost done. She kept standing there. Her eyes would flick over to the trees along the road, like someone else was out there, just barely out of view. But every time I looked, I didn't see anyone. No lights, no movement, nothing but trees. She kept repeating herself, offering help. Her tone never changed. That weird, calm voice. I stayed polite, even though I was starting to feel that heavy pressure in my chest. That instinct that tells you something isn't right. I told her again I didn't need help and began packing up my tools, wanting to end the conversation. Then, out of nowhere, her voice changed. Gone was the soft, gentle tone. Now it was harsh, cold, angry. She said, "I think you really need my help." Not like a suggestion, but like a threat. My heart jumped. I told her to leave. I didn't yell, but I made my voice firm, told her I had my wife and kids sleeping in the truck, and I wasn't in the mood to deal with whatever this was. I said if she didn't walk away, I'd call the cops. Or worse, I didn't have a weapon, but I hoped I sounded like someone who could handle himself. She laughed. She just stood there laughing like it was a joke. I turned away to get the lug wrench, thinking maybe I'd hold it just in case she came closer. And then she was on me. She'd picked up the wrench I'd left on the ground and swung it toward my head. If I hadn't turned at that moment, she might have cracked my skull open. I caught the wrench with my arm, the metal slamming into my forearm with a force that sent pain shooting up to my shoulder. I didn't even think, I just reacted. I kicked her hard in the leg. She crumpled, yelling something I couldn't even understand. I didn't wait. I grabbed the rest of the tools and threw them into the back. I jumped into the truck, slammed the door, pushed the start button, and took off. I kept checking the rearview mirror. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel straight. I expected to see her chasing after me, or someone else stepping out of the woods to block the road. But no one came, just empty road behind me. I didn't stop until I reached the campgrounds. My wife woke up when I parked. I told her everything. She didn't believe me at first, thought maybe I'd imagined it, until I showed her the bruise on my arm and the faint smear of dirt on the side of the truck from where she'd grabbed the door. We called the police, gave them the location, the description, everything. They said they'd send someone to check the area, but didn't sound too urgent about it. My wife is still angry that I didn't call them right away when it happened. Maybe she's right. I just panicked. Now we're at the campsite. The kids are laughing by the lake. My wife is trying to pretend nothing happened, but I can't stop thinking about her, about how she looked at me, about the way she laughed after I threatened her. I keep imagining her hiding in the woods, watching us. She saw our gear. She knows we're camping. What if she followed us? I don't know what she wanted. My truck? Our stuff? Something worse? Maybe she was just unstable. Maybe she and someone else set the whole thing up. Flattened tires. Wait for travelers. Maybe I was lucky. I don't know. All I know is I'm locking the doors every night. I'm keeping my eyes open. And I hope, really hope, I never see her again. A few years ago, I took up this habit of going on long walks through the woods near where I lived. It wasn't the kind of forest you'd find on a hiking brochure, more of a forgotten chunk of land behind some old industrial buildings. with narrow dirt trails and overgrown trees that twisted together above your head. I liked that it was quiet and off the beaten path. I could go hours without seeing another person, and something about that made me feel calm. It gave me space to think. One afternoon in early fall, I went for a walk after work. I remember it had been a long, heavy day, and I just needed to clear my head. I didn't take my usual route that day. Instead, I followed a thin game trail that veered off into the denser part of the woods, the kind of path that probably only deer or raccoons used. It was a little muddy in spots, and I had to duck under some low branches. The further I went, the more closed in the woods felt. The trees grew close together, and the sunlight barely made it through the canopy. It must have been about a half hour in when I smelled something strange. At first, I thought maybe it was just some rotting plant matter, wet leaves, or an animal carcass. But as I kept walking, the smell got stronger. It was sweet, but in a sickening way, like syrup poured over something spoiled. I stopped and stood still, just breathing through my mouth, trying to figure out what it was. Something about it made my stomach churn. I don't know what made me look. I guess I was just curious. The smell was strongest near this thick wall of undergrowth, ferns, vines, and low-hanging branches. I pushed through it with both hands, pulling the plants aside until I could see what was behind. That's when I found him. The body was lying face up, half covered in leaves and debris, like it had been there a while. I froze the second I saw him. He wasn't whole anymore. His skin was bloated, stretched tight, and shiny in some places, dark green and almost black in others. His eyes were gone, just sunken hollows in his face. Parts of his mouth looked chewed or torn, and there were insects crawling all over him. Flies had laid eggs. Tiny wriggling things moved in his skin. I staggered back and almost threw up. I remember just standing there, staring, my hands shaking. I fumbled for my phone, dropped it, picked it back up, and called the police. I told them what I'd found and tried to give them directions, which was tough since I was way off any marked trail. They told me to stay put, that someone would be out as soon as they could. So I sat down. That was probably the worst part. Sitting there, waiting. I couldn't bring myself to look at him again, but I couldn't stop thinking about him either. I couldn't help wondering who he was. What had happened? How long he'd been lying out there? The police said it might take a while since I was hard to reach. They weren't kidding. It got dark fast. The sun was already low when I made the call, and in that part of the woods, night falls fast. Soon, I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. My phone's flashlight barely helped. I kept it on anyway. I sat on a patch of bare dirt about 10 feet away from the body, trying not to move too much, trying not to breathe in the smell. My head kept filling with worst-case scenarios. Bears, coyotes, getting lost, getting blamed. I kept hearing noises too, twigs snapping, leaves rustling. Probably just animals, but every sound made me jump. And through it all, he was there, lying still, silent. The bugs kept going. The smell was unbearable. It took nearly 3 hours for them to reach me. When the first flashlight beams cut through the trees, I nearly cried from relief. 2 officers and a guy from search and rescue appeared. I led them to the body, trying to keep my voice steady. They took over from there, asking me questions, making notes, taping off the area. A medical examiner showed up a bit later. One of the officers told me, quietly, that it looked like a suicide. Pills and a bottle of alcohol were found near the body, though everything was pretty scattered. They asked if I was okay, gave me some water, and after a long wait and some more questions, they finally walked me out. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, seeing his face every time I blinked. In the weeks after, I kept thinking about him. I read the local news, but never saw anything more than a small article confirming the discovery. They didn't release his name, just that it was a man, likely in his 40s, believed to have taken his own life. No foul play suspected. At first, I chalked the dreams up to stress. The first one came a few days after I found him. I was back in the woods in the dream, but it was even darker than I remembered, and I couldn't find my way out. I kept hearing footsteps behind me, but when I turned, nothing was there. Then suddenly I was back in that clearing, and he was sitting up, looking at me. He never said anything in those early dreams, just stared. Sometimes he pointed, sometimes he crawled toward me. I'd always wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, convinced for a moment I was still there in the woods. Over time, the dreams got worse. He'd appear in different places, on the side of the road, in the hallway outside my bedroom, once even in the back seat of my car when I looked in the rearview mirror. He never looked alive. Always the same sunken face, the ruined skin. And then he started speaking. His voice was always just above a whisper, but the words were sharp and clear. He'd tell me I'd disturbed him, that I should have left him alone, that I didn't belong here anymore. Sometimes he'd tell me to do things, terrible things, things I don't want to write down. I'd wake up shaking, sometimes crying. I stopped going into the woods. I sold the boots I wore that day, threw away the clothes I had on. It felt stupid, but it also felt necessary. I started therapy after about 2 months of the dreams. The therapist told me it was likely a stress response, trauma from seeing something so gruesome, a form of PTSD. I accepted that. I want to believe it. I still do. But sometimes I wonder, not about ghosts or any of that, just about what gets left behind when someone dies like that, especially alone in the middle of nowhere. Maybe something settles into the ground around them. Maybe when you sit next to it, even for a few hours, something gets inside you. I still dream about him sometimes. Not as often now. Once every few months, maybe. And it's not always terrifying. Sometimes it's just a glimpse, his face behind a tree or a flash of movement in the shadows. I always wake up feeling cold and unsettled. But I'm okay now. Mostly. I keep myself busy. I try not to think too much about that day. I haven't gone back to those woods, and I never will. I know it sounds strange, but I don't blame him. Whatever drove him to that place, to do what he did, it must have been hell. Maybe he didn't want to be found. Maybe I did disturb something. All I know is that I found him. I saw what was left of him, and I think some small part of that moment, of him, will always be with me, whether I want it to be or not. It was just a normal October afternoon when we went out to look for Halloween costumes. Me and 3 of my friends had driven to this rundown thrift store on the edge of town. The kind of place with flickering lights, rows of old clothes that smelled like dust and mildew, and warped floor tiles that creaked when you stepped on them. We weren't expecting anything serious. Just a couple of hours joking around, trying on weird costumes, maybe grabbing some fast food after. I had just gotten my CPR certification a week earlier. I took the course because it felt like something I should know. I never imagined I'd have to actually use it so soon. We had split up inside the store, everyone digging through the racks. I was in the dressing room, trying on a long black coat, when everything suddenly got really quiet. Before that, the place was loud. People laughing, music playing through some tinny ceiling speaker, workers chatting behind the counter. Then silence. It was strange enough that I stepped out of the dressing room, still wearing the coat, and looked around. One of the workers had a panicked look on her face, her phone pressed to her ear. People were gathered at the front window. I heard someone say that a woman was passed out in the parking lot. My stomach dropped. Without thinking, I said, "I'm certified. I'll go check. Call 911. I didn't wait for a response. I rushed outside, scanning the lot. At first, I didn't see anyone. No one was lying on the pavement like I expected. Just rows of cars, some with people inside, some empty. Someone behind me called out, saying she was in a car parked far out near the edge of the lot. I looked where they pointed and saw a silver sedan by itself, all the way at the end, tucked into the corner. I ran. As I got closer, I saw her. She was slumped against the driver's side window, head tilted back, mouth open. Her face was blue, lips, cheeks, everything. It was the kind of blue that makes your brain scream that something is very wrong. I froze for half a second, unsure if I was even seeing a real person, but then the fear kicked me forward. I yanked the door handle, but it was locked. A guy who had followed me from the store ran around to the passenger side and managed to get the door open from there. We both reached in. I remember the way her body felt when we tried to move her. Heavy, lifeless, cold. When we turned her head, I saw the tears on her cheeks. That's the part that sticks with me the most. She wasn't crying anymore, but the tears were still there, fresh, clinging to the sides of her face. I was shaking, but I forced myself to check her pulse. I couldn't feel anything. The guy checked too, said maybe he felt something, but he wasn't sure. We pulled her out of the car and laid her flat on the ground. The concrete was hot from the sun, and I could feel it through my knees when I knelt beside her. I started compressions. I counted in my head, trying to remember everything I'd learned in the class. Heel of the hand in the center of the chest. Push hard, push fast. I couldn't think about anything else. Not the people watching. Not the fact that she might already be gone. Just a rhythm, down, up, down, up. I don't know how long I did it. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Then the ambulance arrived. They rushed over immediately, and one of them told me to back up while they took over. They hooked her up to machines, did their own compressions, got oxygen going. Another ambulance showed up a few seconds later. I stepped back and watched them swarm around her. 6 of them, moving fast, communicating in clipped, calm voices. One of them pulled out a syringe. I heard another say something about Narcan. I knew from the class that Narcan could reverse an opioid overdose if given in time. But even then, she didn't move. A police officer came over and started asking me questions. I barely registered what I was saying, just told him I had CPR certification, that I found her like this, that we pulled her out and tried. I kept looking over his shoulder at her. Her shirt had ridden up a little when we moved her, and I could see bruises on her side. There were track marks on her arms. The EMTs were still working on her, still doing CPR, still trying to get something out of the machines. I noticed the inside of the car for the first time. There were needles scattered on the floor, along with an empty pill bottle that had rolled under the seat. Fast food wrappers, an old hoodie, some receipts. But what really got to me was the stuff in the back seat. A car seat, a couple of small plastic toys, a half-empty juice box, and the cup holder. She had kids. Someone later told me she had names tattooed on her arm. 2 of them, written in delicate cursive. Probably her children. I didn't see them myself, but I didn't doubt it. The paramedics eventually got her loaded onto a stretcher and into the back of the ambulance. One of them was still pumping her chest as they rolled her away. The cop told us that sometimes people make it if the Narcan kicks in quick enough, but he didn't sound hopeful. He said they would do everything until they got to the hospital, and then if there was nothing left to try, they'd call it. He looked tired, like he'd seen it too many times before. I stood there in the sun, sweating in that black coat I never took off. I didn't realize until then that my hand was shaking. My heart was still racing like I was running a marathon. My friends had come outside by then, but I didn't talk to them. I couldn't. Eventually, they let us leave. The ride home was quiet. Nobody said anything for a long time. I just stared out the window and kept seeing her face, blue, tear-streaked, empty. I kept thinking about how we found her, about the silence in the thrift store, about the way everyone had just frozen. I thought about the CPR class, how we used plastic dummies with rubbery chests and a voice that said, "Good job," when you did it right. This wasn't like that. This was her ribs cracking under my hands. This was trying to push life into someone who might already be gone. This was real. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept wondering if she'd made it. I knew she probably didn't. The way she looked, I'd never seen anything like that. But I still hoped. Just a little. The next day, I called the non-emergency police line. I gave them the time and place and asked if they knew what happened to the woman. The person on the phone was kind, but she told me they couldn't give out information like that. So I never found out for sure. All I know is that I tried. At 19 years old, I gave someone a fighting chance. I was the first one to touch her after she died or started dying. I was the last stranger to see her before she left. And even if it wasn't enough, it mattered. It's been a few years now. I still think about her. I still picture her face. But I also remember the way everyone came together in that moment. Strangers opening doors, helping pull her out, calling 911. I remember how fast the EMTs worked, how serious they were. I remember the kids' toys in the back seat, and I wonder what happened to them. That day changed me. It made everything feel more real, more fragile. It taught me that being prepared matters, but also that sometimes it's just not enough. Life doesn't always wait for help to arrive. Sometimes it slips away in silence, in a parked car at the edge of a parking lot, while the world keeps spinning. But still, I was there. I did what I could, and I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life. I used to walk through the cemetery almost every day. It wasn't out of some strange fascination with the dead or anything like that. It was just a shortcut from my apartment to the bus stop. Walking through the cemetery shaved off almost 7 minutes. I timed it once, and when you're running late for work almost every morning, 7 minutes feels like gold. The cemetery itself was old. Some of the graves were from the early 1900s, maybe even earlier. Most of the headstones were cracked or leaning, and the names on a lot of them had worn away to the point where you could barely read them. The city must have stopped maintaining it years ago. The grass was always patchy, some parts overgrown, others just dry and full of dirt and broken twigs. Sometimes I'd see stray cats weaving between the headstones. Occasionally, a deer or two if I passed through early enough. It was quiet in there, though. That's what I liked. Just the wind, birds, and the sound of my own footsteps. There was one grave I always passed. It wasn't any different than the others, but I noticed it because of the old rusted fence that stood around it. 4 thin metal posts with a couple of bars between them, more decorative than secure. The gate was always open and hanging by a single hinge. The name on the stone was gone, completely smoothed over by years of rain and sun. But someone still left flowers there, which was strange. Not fresh ones, but not totally dead either. Maybe fake. They were always different colors, sometimes blue, sometimes white. I never saw anyone put them there. No one ever seemed to be around when I passed through, no matter what time it was. The whole place felt like it had been forgotten, except for that one grave. A few weeks ago, something changed. I was walking through like I always did, cutting between the north gate and the big oak tree near the middle. I passed the grave with the rusted fence, glanced at it like usual, and kept going. But then I noticed something out of place. At first, I thought it was just a branch in the wrong spot or some trash someone had tossed over the fence. But when I looked closer, I saw it was a notebook, a small black spiral-bound one, sitting right there on the flat top of the gravestone inside the little fenced-in area. It didn't look weathered or wet. It hadn't rained in a while, but still, this thing looked fresh, like someone had just left it there. I stopped. I don't really know why, but I walked up to it. I hesitated for a second before picking it up. It was cold, even in the sunlight. I opened it, flipped through a couple pages. Most of it was blank, but then I saw writing on a few pages near the back. It was just numbers, dates to be more specific, written neatly, one per line, nothing else. The first one was from about 3 months ago, then 1 week later, then another and another, all spaced out by a few days. The last date written down was the day before. I flipped the page, blank. It struck me as strange, but not necessarily creepy. Probably someone's journal. Maybe they came here to sit and think and just forgot it. I figured I'd leave it on the fence post in case they came back for it. But something made me want to check those dates again. I don't know what it was. I took a picture of the page before setting the notebook down. That night, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I remembered the photo. I opened it and looked at the dates again. I had the thought to Google them. I don't even know what I expected, but I started typing them in one by one. The first few brought up nothing, but when I typed in one of the more recent ones, I got a news article. A man had died in a hit and run in the neighborhood. The next date, another article, this time a woman who fell from her apartment window downtown. I kept going. Every date matched to someone who had died locally within a few days of the listed date. My stomach dropped. I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe whoever owned the notebook had been tracking deaths in the area for some morbid reason. Maybe they worked for the coroner or the police. But the notebook had no names, no notes, just the dates. Just clean, straight lists. The next morning, I walked a long way around to the bus stop. I didn't want to pass the cemetery again. But by the third day, I felt stupid. I convinced myself I was just overthinking things. So I went back to walking through. When I passed that grave again, the notebook was gone. But in its place was a small folded piece of paper, weighed down with a rock. I glanced around. Nobody. I didn't want to touch it. I told myself to keep walking. But of course I didn't. I picked it up, unfolded it. One date written in the same handwriting. Just one. The next day's date. I dropped the paper like it burned me. I walked out of the cemetery without looking back. I didn't sleep that night. I called in sick to work and stayed inside all day. I kept checking the news, wondering if someone would die, if something would happen that matched the date. Around 8:30 p.m., I saw a post on a local forum. Someone had been found dead in an alley near the gas station 2 blocks from my apartment. Shot in the chest. No ID. Police asking for help identifying the man. The time of death? Sometime between 7 o'clock and 7:30 p.m. Same day as the paper. I started having dreams after that. Not nightmares exactly, but dreams where I was back in the cemetery. Always standing in front of that one grave. Sometimes it was night, sometimes day, but always silent. And in the dream, there'd be someone standing at the far edge of the cemetery, too far for me to see clearly. Not moving, just watching. I stopped walking through the cemetery entirely. Took the long way every day. I even moved apartments after a week, used some of my savings just to get out of the area. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't take it anymore. A few months passed. Things settled. The dreams faded. I started feeling normal again. Then, about 2 weeks ago, I was walking back from the grocery store and passed a different cemetery. A much smaller one near my new apartment. I never noticed it before, maybe because it was tucked behind some buildings. At the edge of it, sitting on a low stone wall, was a small black notebook. I froze. I walked over to it without really deciding to. Just like before, it was fresh. No dirt. No wear. I opened it. Blank pages until the last few. Dates again, all different from the ones I'd seen last time. The last date was today's. And then I realized something else. My name was written at the bottom of the page. It wasn't possible. I felt a ringing in my ears and had to sit down. I stared at the notebook for what felt like an hour. I didn't touch it again. I got up and left it there. I didn't sleep at all that night. My apartment was quiet, but every sound felt amplified. Every creak, every car door, every footstep in the hallway. I kept thinking about that name, my name. No last name, no details. Just my first name, written in small, clean handwriting. But I didn't die that day. Nothing happened. No accident, no heart attack, nothing. I made it through, and that's when it hit me. Maybe the notebook wasn't a prediction. Maybe it was a list. And maybe I had a choice. A chance. So the next morning, I went back. I forced myself to go to that small cemetery again. The notebook was still there, right where I left it. I picked it up and walked straight to the nearest dumpster and threw it in. Then I walked back to my apartment without stopping. That was 2 weeks ago. I've been fine since. No more dreams. No more notebooks. Nothing. I don't know who keeps leaving them. I don't know if it means anything or if it's some sick game someone's playing. But I know this. I'm never setting foot in a cemetery again. Not as a shortcut. Not for curiosity. Not for anything. A lot of people hate the city, but honestly, I would take the city over the wilderness any day of the week. The traffic, the noise, the crowds, it can be annoying. But there's a certain comfort in it too. In the city, you're rarely alone. There are always people around. Streetlights are always on. If something happens, there's help nearby. After what happened last year, I've never looked at the wilderness the same again. It started when one of my closest friends went through a really tough breakup. She had been with her fiancé for 7 years. They were practically married. When they split, it was messy. She wasn't in a good place. Her confidence was wrecked, and she was constantly either crying or completely shut down. Our other friend, the more outdoorsy one, thought a change of scenery would help. She suggested a night away in the woods. Just one night to disconnect and be surrounded by peace and quiet. Surprisingly, our recently single friend agreed to it. I figured she just needed to get out of the apartment. So the three of us started looking for a spot that felt remote but not completely cut off. We didn't want to go deep into the forest or anything like that. Eventually, we found a little cottage online. It wasn't far from a small town and was described as perfect for weekend getaways. The pictures made it look charming. Nothing fancy, just a tiny wooden cabin with a porch and a fire pit out back. We packed up snacks, wine, and a few sleeping bags and drove out there on a Saturday afternoon. It took us about 2 hours to get there. As soon as we pulled up, I knew this wasn't going to be my kind of weekend. The trees surrounded the property so tightly it felt like the place was swallowed by the woods. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, no neighbors in sight. The sun was still out when we arrived, but already I couldn't shake the feeling that we were really out there, away from everything. Inside the cottage, it was just as basic as the photos made it seem. One small kitchen, a living area with mismatched furniture, and a single bedroom. There was an old fireplace and a stack of board games, but nothing else to do. Still, I tried to go with it. I wanted to support my friend and at least pretend like this was relaxing. By nightfall, the boredom hit. I knew it would. Our friend, who just went through the breakup, was clearly already over the whole idea. She kept checking her phone even though she had no signal, pacing around, acting like she wanted to be anywhere else. After a while, she started looking for places nearby and somehow found this bar in a small town about 15 minutes away. It was called something like Timber Tap or Rusty Nail. I can't remember, but it had a classic dive bar name. She convinced us to go. I didn't mind, to be honest. I joked that this was my idea of camping. Drinks and music in a building with a roof and running water. The bar was exactly what I expected. Dim lights, wood paneling, a few pool tables, and a handful of locals scattered around. The kind of place where everyone already knows each other. My friend ended up talking to this man, sitting alone near the back. He looked like he was in his 40s, maybe early 50s, rugged but clean. Worn flannel shirt, strong hands, quiet smile. He didn't seem threatening, just weathered. They talked for a while, and at first it seemed innocent. But after a couple drinks, it was clear she was flirting. She touched his arm when she laughed, leaned in close, and looked him dead in the eyes. He wasn't overly touchy or aggressive, but he was definitely into her too. Eventually, she pulled away from him and told us she was ready to go back to the cottage. I was glad. Something about that man made me uneasy, though I couldn't say why at the time. Maybe it was just being in a strange place far from home. We teased her on the drive back, asking when the wedding was, but she just laughed and brushed it off. She said it was just some light flirting and didn't mean anything. Back at the cottage, we poured one glass of wine each, sat around chatting for maybe 20 minutes, then decided to sleep. There was nothing else to do. None of us wanted to sleep in the bedroom alone, so we pushed the armchair closer to the love seat and couch, made a makeshift sleeping area in the living room, and curled up in our blankets. We were all asleep before midnight. At around 3:15 in the morning, I felt someone tapping me. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I opened my eyes and saw my outdoorsy friend staring at me wide-eyed. She didn't say anything out loud, just whispered that she thought she heard the doorknob shaking. I rolled my eyes and told her it was probably the wind, but then I heard it too. It wasn't loud, but it was rhythmic, a soft metallic rattle, like someone was gently turning the knob back and forth. It kept going. I froze, hoping it was nothing, but the sound didn't stop. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. They were trying to get in. We didn't know what to do. We were in the middle of nowhere. No cell signal, no weapons, no neighbors to hear us scream. We didn't even move, just sat there under the blankets, breathing as quietly as we could. Then we heard footsteps outside. Slow, careful steps crunching on the dead leaves and twigs. The person was walking around the cottage. We could hear exactly where he was from each little twig snapping underfoot. It was almost worse than the doorknob, knowing he was out there, knowing he was moving closer to the back of the cottage. And that's when it hit me, the large window behind the couch. We all turned and stared at the curtain, terrified. Then we heard it, a slow rustling sound. Something was brushing against the other side of the curtain. Then a faint tapping. Someone was trying to slide the window open. I don't know what came over me, but I shouted out that I was calling the police. I yelled it with as much authority as I could, hoping it would scare him off. Everything went silent. For a moment, all we could hear was our own breathing. Then we heard whispering, a man's voice, low and deliberate, repeating my friend's name. Her full name, not just her first. He must have heard at the bar when we said it, or maybe she told him herself. Either way, the sound of it made my skin crawl. I couldn't take it anymore. I ripped the curtain open. The man from the bar was standing there, barely 2 feet away, on the other side of the glass. His eyes went wide like a deer caught in headlights. He raised his hands like he was trying to calm us down, like we were overreacting or something. Then he turned and ran. He didn't run to a car, not that we could see. He disappeared into the woods. We called the police using the landline inside the cottage. They arrived about 30 minutes later, looked around, asked us questions, and said they'd file a report. They didn't find the man. There wasn't much they could do. We packed up our things and left right after they did. not even bothering with sleep. We just wanted to get out of there. The whole drive home, we tried to make sense of what happened. We realized we got back to the cottage before midnight. That guy didn't try to break in until after 3 a.m. That means he followed us. He either trailed our car or waited near the bar until we left. Then he found out where we were staying, hid in the woods, and waited for hours. The thought of him crouched in the dark, watching the house, listening for us to go to sleep. It makes me sick even now. We found out the window wasn't even locked. If he had tried harder, he could have gotten in. The only thing that saved us was that my friend happened to wake up and hear the doorknob. If she hadn't, I don't know what would have happened. I don't like to think about it. Oddly enough, that night became a turning point for my friend. Something about being that close to real danger made everything else feel smaller. She said the breakup felt less like the end of the world and more like a bad chapter. She started therapy, changed jobs, and moved into her own place. She said surviving that night made her realize how badly she wanted to live. I think about that a lot. As for me, I haven't been camping since. I stick to the city now. Say what you will about it, but I sleep a lot better with streetlights outside my window than total silence and shadows in the trees. I was 11 when this happened. My older sister Ariel was 14 and my younger sister Belle was 8. My dad was a freelance programmer, and while he made good money from big projects, he was drowning in debt. Over $500,000, I remember hearing once. My mom wasn't any better at managing money, so we didn't get to do the things other families did. We never had family vacations to Disney or flights to beaches. Our vacations usually meant visiting a relative's house, sleeping on a couch, and being told not to touch anything. But that one week, things were different. Dad had just wrapped up a major project for some company. He didn't tell us the details, he never did, but it was clear the paycheck had been a big one. We were celebrating that night at home. He bought a few frozen pizzas, root beer, and rented a scary movie, Final Destination. He loved horror movies, especially the ones that freaked us out. I didn't want to admit how much I liked them too, even if they kept me up at night. The movie was just getting to one of the more intense parts when the phone rang. Dad went to get it in the kitchen. We kept watching, but Belle, who was never great with scary stuff, paused the movie and grabbed Duchess, our dog, pulling her onto the couch for protection. A few minutes later, Dad came back with Mom, and they both had weird looks on their faces. Then they told us we were going on a weekend trip. Apparently, the client he'd worked for owned a cabin by a lake in the mountains and had offered it to Dad for almost nothing. They called it a thank you gift. It was already Thursday night, so Mom went into a whirlwind of packing. She was tossing clothes into bags, barking orders, and digging through drawers for sunscreen and bug spray. We didn't even get to finish the movie. The next day, Friday, we left right after school. It was about a 2.5-hour drive through winding roads that made Belle feel sick and turned Ariel's face into a permanent scowl. It was already getting dark when we finally pulled up to the cabin. The place was a single-story, long ranch-style house with wood paneling and a stone chimney. It smelled like pine needles and old wood when we walked inside. There was a little nook just above the main living area that looked like a storage loft, but it had some pillows and a stack of dusty board games. It was just big enough for us kids to climb up and play. We immediately loved it and named it the Crow's Nest. Once we explored the cabin, we claimed our rooms. Mom and Dad took the big bedroom. Ariel grabbed the smaller room with a twin bed for herself. Belle and I got the remaining room. It had a queen-size bed we'd have to share. The room had a window on the right side of the bed, with no curtain, which bothered me a little. There was a lamp on a small table beside the bed, which was our only light source since the ceiling bulb didn't work. Across from the bed was a wooden closet, but it was locked tight. We tried the knob a few times, but it wouldn't budge. We joked about what might be inside, but no one could figure it out. That night, after we played games in the loft and had grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner, we went to bed around 11. I remember lying on the inside edge of the bed, closest to the lamp, while Belle slept near the window. She tended to kick in her sleep, and I didn't want to get hit. I must have passed out quickly, because the next thing I remember is Belle clawing at me in the middle of the night. She was trying to bury herself under my arm, shaking hard. and saying something I couldn't understand. I sat up, trying to wake up properly, and turned toward her side of the bed. Outside the window, I saw something. A pale shape, human-shaped, not clearly a face or a figure, but enough to tell it wasn't an animal, was moving away into the dark. My brain didn't fully register what I saw until it was already gone, but the panic hit hard once it did. I pulled Belle out of bed and we ran to our parents' room. They didn't believe us. Dad rubbed his face and told us we probably just had a nightmare. Mom told us to go back to bed, and if anything happened again, we should wake them up. I wanted to argue, but I didn't. I was just a kid. We went back to our room. Belle refused to sleep on her side now, so we switched. I read to her from an old paperback I'd brought until she drifted off. I fell asleep soon after. The next morning, things felt normal again. Sunlight made everything feel safe. We spent a couple of hours exploring around the lake. Belle found a bunch of frogs and wouldn't stop chasing them. Dad eventually loaded us back into the van and drove us into the nearby town. It had a strip of small shops, the kind that sell taffy and candles and handmade scarves. Mom spent forever in each one. We ate lunch at a diner with cracked leather booze and returned for dinner later that evening. By the time we got back to the cabin, it was nearly sunset. We were all in a good mood. Ariel had just made some joke about how we should pretend the cabin was haunted to mess with Belle when Dad suddenly raised his hand to stop us from walking. He took a few steps toward the front porch and just stood there, staring at the door. Then, without saying anything, he reached out with one finger and pushed it open. The door wasn't latched, not even shut all the way. I didn't understand what was wrong at first, but his face looked tense. He motioned for Ariel to keep close to Belle and me, but told us to stay quiet. Then he went inside by himself. We waited on the porch. Mom whispered his name at some point, and he called back from inside, saying we could come in. When we stepped inside, he was standing in the middle of the living room, staring at the floor. He locked the door behind us and then quietly pulled Mom into their bedroom. Ariel distracted Belle and me with one of the board games. We hadn't even been playing 5 minutes when they came back out. Mom went straight to the kitchen and started washing the breakfast dishes from earlier. Dad sat with us and joined the game. He was smiling, but it didn't feel real. We played for a couple hours before he said it was bedtime. It was only 9, which made Ariel grumble. She always had to stay up late on weekends. But B and I went to bed. We slept in the same spots as before. I remember Belle asking if we could read again, so I read for a bit before we both fell asleep. The next thing I knew, Dad was rushing into our room, lifting Belle out of the bed and grabbing my hand. I was still half asleep when he yanked me into the hallway. I saw Ariel being pulled by Mom in the same way. The living room had this strange sound in it, like a high-pitched whine. It didn't make sense at first. Duchess was sitting by the back door, fur on end, growling low. Dad didn't put Belle down. He dragged us all out of the house and into the van. He only let go of me when we were inside, and he had thrown Duchess in with us. Then he started the car and peeled out of the driveway like we were being chased. Nobody said a word the entire ride back. Not Mom, not Dad, not any of us. We didn't get home until close to 2 in the morning. Duchess eventually settled down in the back seat, but none of us kids could sleep. The next day, Dad told Ariel what happened, but not Belle or me. We only found out years later. He'd woken up that night because he heard something outside his bedroom window. Not just footsteps, but moaning. Like someone hurt or trying to call for help, but muffled. When he looked outside, he saw that the front door was wide open. Stuff in the kitchen had been moved, drawers open, a cereal box dumped out on the counter. That's when Duchess started growling at the back door, which was cracked open. Not wide, but just enough. That was enough for him. He didn't try to find out who it was. He didn't check the rest of the cabin. He just got us out. He went back the next day during daylight to get our things. Nothing was stolen, nothing broken, but he found several sets of footprints outside our bedroom window. Adult-sized ones. More than one person. We never went back. A few years ago, when my wife was still just my girlfriend, we decided on an impromptu camping trip. It was her idea. I'd never really been into camping, just a couple of times with a friend growing up, but she had camped a lot with her family when she was younger and missed it. She said she wanted to reconnect with the outdoors, get away from the city noise, and just have some real time together, somewhere peaceful and quiet. At that point in our lives, the city was starting to wear both of us down. The constant honking, the crowds, the dirty air, it was all getting too much. She thought the trip would be refreshing, and I agreed. I figured a couple of days in the woods wouldn't hurt. She went all out for the trip. Even though it was just going to be for 2 nights, she bought all this camping gear online. New sleeping bags, a portable stove, lanterns, a cooler, and a tent. A really big one. Bigger than I expected, especially for 2 people. But I didn't mind. I was a big guy back then, around 6 feet 2 inches and heavy set, so having extra space to move around was welcome. One of the things I liked about the tent was the little plastic window it had. Nothing fancy, just a clear square built into the wall of the tent. It didn't open or close, but it was positioned at just the right height, so if I lay down on my side, I could look out without moving. I liked the idea of being able to see outside at night without unzipping anything. And I liked even more the thought of light pouring in during the morning to gently wake us up. We picked a campsite that was way out there. I don't even remember the exact name of the area anymore, but it wasn't part of any formal campground. It was a desolate little patch of forest we'd found mentioned on an old forum thread. Some guy had written about how peaceful it was, how he never ran into another soul when he camped there. That sounded exactly like what we were looking for. We arrived that first afternoon. The sun was still pretty high, and we had a couple of hours before dark. We parked off a small dirt path that was barely wide enough for the car and hiked maybe half a mile into the trees. The air was cool and clean, and the only sound we heard were birds and the crunch of our boots on leaves. It felt perfect, quiet, away from everything, no signs of other people, just us in the woods. We picked a nice little clearing near some tall pines. It was flat and dry, and there were a few logs around we could sit on. We pitched the tent and rolled out our sleeping bags inside. We didn't bother with a fire that night. We were both tired from the drive and the hike and decided to just eat cold sandwiches from the cooler and call it an early night. That night, I lay on my side and stared out the little window. The stars were out in full. I could see patches of sky between the trees, and the moon was low and bright enough to illuminate the forest a bit. It wasn't creepy at all. It was beautiful, peaceful. I fell asleep with a smile on my face. The next day, we woke up early. As I hoped, the morning sunlight lit up the tent through the window like a soft alarm clock. It was one of the best mornings I'd had in a long time. We made some instant coffee on the portable stove and spent the day exploring nearby trails, fishing at a small creek we found, and just relaxing. I lay back on one of the logs and read for a few hours while she sketched things in her notebook. We barely spoke most of the day, and we didn't need to. Everything was quiet and easy. That night, we ate hot dogs and chips, then packed everything up and got into the tent as the sun was setting. The forest was starting to cool off fast, and it felt good crawling into the sleeping bags. I made sure the little window was propped open again so I could see out. We talked a bit in the dark, mostly about how nice everything had been, how we needed to do this more often. We eventually got quiet, and I started drifting off. I wasn't fully asleep yet when I thought I saw something move outside. It wasn't loud, just the faintest flicker of movement across the field of view I had through that little window. It was dark, but with the moon again shining down, I could make out shapes. I didn't know if I'd imagined it or if I was seeing something real. I propped myself up a bit to get a better look. At first, I didn't see anything. The trees, the bushes, everything looked still. I told myself it was probably just a deer or a branch swaying in the wind. But then my girlfriend sat up quickly and said she saw something too. She didn't scream or panic, just sat up fast and stared. I turned to look out the window again, more alert now. At first, I still didn't see it. Then I did. About 30 or 40 feet from the tent, sitting in the low branches of a tree, was a person, a grown adult, sitting casually like they were waiting for a bus or something. They had on a rubber mask, one of those weird caricatured president masks you see people wear on Halloween. It looked like Nixon or Reagan, I don't know. I couldn't tell exactly. What stood out most wasn't the mask itself, but how relaxed the person seemed. They were just slowly kicking their legs back and forth like a kid swinging their feet off a dock. No urgency, no threat, just sitting there facing our tent. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do. Neither of us moved. We just stared. It was like we were both frozen. My girlfriend started shaking. Not crying, just trembling like her whole body was rejecting what it was seeing. I could hear her breathing get uneven. The person just sat there for what felt like 5 minutes. Then they jumped down, not with a thud or any kind of threat, just dropped quietly to the ground. Still, we didn't move. The tent's fabric suddenly felt paper thin. All I could think about was how easy it would be for someone to slice through it with a pocket knife. The person started walking, but not toward us. They paced slowly back and forth, maybe 20 feet out, always keeping the tent in sight. I never saw a flashlight or any kind of gear, just a mask, some dark clothes, and their slow, deliberate movements. Then they stopped. They just stood there, directly facing the tent. No motion, no sound, like a statue. The only thing moving was their chest rising and falling. Then they laughed. We both heard it, low, muffled, almost like it was coming from a broken speaker. I could tell it was a man, probably middle-aged, judging by the build. He started waving at us, not a friendly wave. His arm jerked violently, side to side, like he was trying to slap the air. It was the scariest part. That wave. It didn't make sense. It didn't belong out there. Then, just as suddenly as it started, he stopped waving, stood still again. And then we heard him say, through the mask in this distant, muffled voice, "Bye, guys." He didn't walk away. He ran, fast, into the woods, like a dog chasing something. No lights, no hesitation, just sprinted and disappeared into the trees. We didn't sleep that night. We sat there still listening. Every little crack of a branch made our hearts jump. At some point, the sun started to rise, but we hadn't even noticed. I think we may have dozed off in bits, but mostly we just stayed up, waiting. As soon as it was light enough, we packed up. We didn't talk. We didn't eat. Just packed everything and made the silent, tense walk back to the car. On the way out, we looked around for footprints or any sign that someone had been there. We didn't find a thing. No tracks, no gear left behind. It was like he'd vanished. The drive home was quiet. That silence lingered for a while in our relationship, too. Neither of us really knew how to talk about it. It was too weird, too scary, and we couldn't explain it. All we knew was that someone had been watching us. For how long? We'll never know. He could have been in that tree all day, maybe even the night before. We never reported it. What could we say? A guy in a mask sat in a tree and scared us? There was nothing illegal about it, technically, but it changed how we thought about being alone in the woods. We've gone camping a few times since then, but only in cabins. We want solid walls, real doors, locks, and cell service. That trip taught us something. Being alone in the woods might feel peaceful until it's not. And when it's not, there's no one around to help you. Just you, a thin wall of fabric, and the darkness. About 5 years ago, my wife and I took a camping trip to Colorado. I still remember it like it happened yesterday. We both needed a break from everything. Work, city life, all the noise. And somehow, like always, she managed to find the perfect spot for us. I don't know how she does it. Every time I try to plan anything, even something small, it turns into a disaster. She's the one who keeps everything in line. She's organized, smart, and always thinking ahead. It's one of the many reasons I love her. Without her, I would have probably ended up lost somewhere or sleeping in a motel off the highway. We packed our truck with everything we needed: tent, grill, sleeping bags, food, water, a small speaker for music, and a cooler stuffed with whatever snacks we could fit. We weren't planning on seeing any stores or other people for 5 whole days, which sounded like heaven. The area we were heading to allowed for dispersed camping, meaning we didn't need to reserve a specific campsite. We had complete freedom to set up wherever we wanted. When we got to the general area, I drove around slowly, scanning the landscape until I found what looked like the perfect spot. Flat land, a bit of shade from some weird-looking trees I wasn't familiar with, and a wide-open view of the mountains in the distance. We were surrounded by a combination of sand, rock, and patches of brushy vegetation that I wasn't used to, being someone who grew up on the East Coast. It was beautiful in a dry, rugged kind of way. No lakes, no forests, no classic horror movie setting. Just sun, wind, and rock. I fell in love with it instantly. There was a rawness to it, that made me feel small in the best way. And the silence, it was real silence. Not the kind where you still hear cars on the highway, a few miles off, or someone's music in the distance. This was pure, undisturbed quiet. We didn't see a single other person the entire time we were there. That only made it better. It felt like the world had been emptied just for us. The first 2 days were amazing. We hiked trails during the day, took hundreds of pictures, watched the sunset from the roof of the truck, and grilled burgers over a small campfire. We slept early, woke up early, and just enjoyed everything around us. I didn't check my phone once. It was the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Then came the third night. We didn't do much that evening because we were a little sore from all the hiking earlier. We cooked up some leftover chicken on the grill and sat under the stars, not talking much, just listening to the wind. By around 9, we were both tired enough to call a night. We climbed into the tent and zipped ourselves in. I remember checking my watch before I drifted off. It was 9:03. That's the last thing I remember before falling asleep. Sometime later, I don't know how long, I woke up to my wife shaking me. At first, I thought maybe she had to use the bathroom or something, but then I saw the look on her face. Her eyes were wide and focused, and she had one finger up against her lips. She was telling me not to speak. Then she pointed outside the tent. I didn't hear anything at first. I stared at the thin fabric of the tent, my ears straining to catch whatever had woken her. I looked back at her, and she mouthed the words, "I think there's an animal out there." At first, I didn't take it seriously. I thought maybe a squirrel or raccoon had come sniffing around. I smiled a little, thinking it was kind of cute that she got so worked up over that. But then I heard it, a growl. But not the kind of growl you'd expect from a bear or mountain lion. It was high-pitched, weak, and uneven, like it was trying to sound more threatening than it really was. It didn't sound like a healthy animal. It sounded off. I leaned closer to the tent's flap and listened more closely. Then I heard footsteps. Not heavy ones, light, cautious, slow. Something was walking just outside the tent. And it wasn't walking in circles or passing by. It was staying close, circling us. The sound of the footsteps was soft but clear, crunching lightly on the gravel and sand. I suddenly remembered an article I'd read about rabid coyotes attacking people. It wasn't a comforting thought. The idea of some sick animal pacing outside our tent made me feel trapped. I didn't want to wait for it to tear through the fabric. When the sound finally moved a little further away, I made a decision. I reached for the zipper as quietly as I could and began to open the tent flap. I whispered to my wife to get ready to run for the truck. The moment the tent was open wide enough, we both slipped out and jogged quickly but quietly to the truck, trying not to make noise. My hand was shaking as I unlocked the doors, and we both jumped in and locked everything behind us. From the safety of the truck, we looked out through the windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of the animal. Nothing. We stared for what felt like 20 minutes, and there was no movement. The growling had stopped, and the silence was back. My wife, exhausted, leaned back in her seat and started to drift off again. I was just beginning to let myself relax too when I saw something that made my blood go cold. Just a few feet from where the tent was set up, I saw a figure. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. He was crouched down low, almost like he was trying to imitate an animal. He had long, messy hair and what looked like a scraggly beard. His clothes were dirty, torn in places, and he was barefoot. He was walking hunched over, slowly circling where our tent had been. Then he let out the same strange, high-pitched growl we'd heard earlier. It wasn't a sick animal. It had been him the whole time. Before I could even react, 3 more men walked out from behind some bushes near our campsite. They were all dressed the same, ragged, dirty, and wild-looking. They walked into our site casually, whispering and laughing with each other. 3 of them were carrying long, thick sticks, possibly branches or poles. I couldn't tell what they were exactly. They stood near our tent, and then one of them suddenly raised a stick high above his head and slammed it down onto the tent. He did it again, then again. They were destroying the tent, smashing it as if someone was still inside. One of the men shouted something I couldn't make out, but his tone was aggressive. My stomach dropped when I realized they thought we were still in there. I didn't wait to see what they do next. I slammed the key into the ignition and started the truck. The headlights lit up the campsite. and I saw their heads whip around toward us. I hit the gas and drove as fast as I could, turning off the dirt road and back toward the way we came. I didn't stop to look back. I didn't care what they were doing or if they were chasing us. I just drove. My heart was pounding, and I kept one eye on the side mirrors for miles. Eventually, after what felt like forever, we got cell service. My wife called the police and told them everything. She was connected with some park officials, or maybe a ranger. Someone from law enforcement called us a few times afterward for follow-up. We told them where we had been and what had happened. We gave as much detail as we could, though we never got a follow-up. We never found out who those people were or what they were doing out there. We didn't go back for our stuff. The park later charged us for leaving our gear and for canceling our stay early. It didn't matter. Let them keep the tent and the fee. I wasn't going to risk going back, not even in daylight. The thought of what could have happened if we had stayed in that tent that night still gives me chills. I don't know who those people were, or why they were growling like animals in the dark, or what their intentions really were. But I know for sure we weren't supposed to be there, and we weren't supposed to see them. We were lucky we left when we did. Some part of me believes they were testing us, watching to see how we'd react, what we'd do. Maybe they thought we'd be easy prey. I haven't gone camping since. We reached the visitor center around noon, just as a thin mist started to roll through the tall trees lining the gravel road. The sky above was washed out gray, the kind of dull overcast that felt like it pressed on your shoulders. The ranger behind the counter was a guy named Patel. He looked to be in his early 40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and a serious expression. He gave us the rundown like he'd done it 100 times before. When Jake told him we were heading to Mirror Lake Cabin 4, his eyes narrowed a little, not in anger, just something like concern. He didn't say much, but it was the way he paused before handing over the laminated map, the way he looked at our gear, that stuck with me. He pointed to the trail on the map with a pen, tracing the 7-mile stretch leading into the backcountry. "Make sure you get there well before dark," he said. Then, after a beat, "Don't wander off the trail. It's easy to get turned around out there this time of year." That was it. Nothing dramatic. Just a quiet warning. The hike started out normal. Cold air, wet leaves, and that earthy smell you get when autumn's almost over. The trail was easy to follow at first, winding through hardwood forest where the trees stood like skeletons, almost all their leaves gone. Evan was quiet the whole way. He'd just finalized his divorce a few weeks earlier, and it showed in how he walked, like the weight of everything he'd lost hadn't settled yet. He lagged behind a lot, not talking, just staring at the ground. Every now and then he'd pull out his phone like he expected a message. Of course, there was no signal this deep in the woods. Jake tried to keep the mood light, cracking jokes about how he probably brought the wrong kind of whiskey or how he forgot to pack something dumb like socks. I didn't laugh much. I was focused on the trail and the quiet. It wasn't peaceful, not exactly. It was too quiet. No birds, no squirrels. Even the wind seemed to die off the deeper we went. We reached the cabin in late afternoon. It sat in a clearing just as the trees opened up around Mirror Lake. The lake looked like oil, dark and still, not a ripple in sight. The cabin itself was a simple log structure, maybe 12 by 16 feet, with a pitched roof and a little stone fire pit out front. No electricity, no running water. Inside, it smelled like wet wood and cold ashes. There was one small stove, a few cots, and a ladder leading up to a tiny loft. We unloaded our packs, got a fire going in the pit, and cooked dinner, canned chili and instant rice. We ate in silence for the most part, but by the time the sky turned to ash and the trees became silhouettes, we'd all loosened up. The whiskey helped. Evan even cracked a small smile when Jake teased him about his designer jeans. We sat around the fire, talking low and staring out at the woods. It got dark fast. We turned in early. Jake climbed to the loft. Evan took the cot farthest from the stove, near the only window. I stayed close to the wood stove on the lower bunk. The warmth helped. I drifted off almost immediately, the kind of sleep that hits you hard when you're cold and tired and full of food. The knocking came sometime after midnight. 3 sharp taps, evenly spaced. Not loud, just deliberate. I sat up instantly, heart racing, trying to remember where I was. Evan's voice came through the dark. "Did you hear that?" I did. So did Jake, who mumbled something from the loft. It happened again. 3 knocks. This time clearer. At the front door. We all scrambled to sit up, fumbling for headlamps. I didn't want to move. Everything in me said stay in place. But Jake got up and slowly made his way to the door. He looked at us once, then reached out and opened it. No one was there. Just dark trees and the sound of nothing. Evan stepped outside with his flashlight. He swept it across the clearing slowly. "Footprints," he said, voice tight. "There's footprints." I joined him. The flashlight beam lit up a trail of small, bare footprints in the mud. No shoes, no socks, just feet. They circled the cabin once, like someone had walked around it slowly. They were too small for an adult, but there was something off about them. Not quite child-sized either. We went back inside, shut and locked the door, and bolted the shutters tight. No one said a word for a while. I offered to stay up and keep watch. The others didn't argue. I sat there for hours listening. Every creak made me jump. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. But then, just after 3, I heard real movement. Not wind, not animals. Soft, careful steps. I went to the shutter and peered through a small crack. There was a figure, 30 yards away, just standing there at the edge of the clearing. Thin, still, human but wrong somehow. Like it didn't breathe, like it was waiting. I didn't tell the others. I couldn't. Morning finally came. We ate cold granola bars and drank instant coffee. No one talked about the footprints or the figure, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. We stepped outside when the light was strong enough to feel safe. The footprints were still there. Only now there were more of them. Dozens. All around the cabin. All small. All barefoot. Some wove between trees. Others overlapped. It was no prank. We talked about leaving. Jake wanted to go, but Evan hesitated. We barely slept. Hiking 7 miles back would take forever. We agreed to stay one more night. First light tomorrow, we'd leave. No exceptions. The rest of the day dragged. We stayed close to the cabin, gathered firewood, tried to stay busy. Evan was jumpy. He kept staring at the tree lean, flinching at every noise. At one point, I heard something pacing just beyond the trees. But every time I tried to focus on it, it stopped. By nightfall, we were on edge. We lit the fire early, but it didn't help. The darkness came fast, heavier than the night before. Jake locked the door. Evan stood near the stove, arms crossed tightly. The knocking started just after sunset, but it wasn't like before. It came from all sides of the cabin at once. Multiple knocks, different rhythms, sometimes in unison, sometimes not, like a dozen people tapping on the walls. I moved to the window again, opened the shutter just enough. I saw them, 3 figures, standing at the tree lean, evenly spaced, perfectly still. My chest tightened, then something hit the window, hard. A handprint, mud smeared across the glass. Evan lost it, said he had to go to the outhouse. I begged him to wait. He didn't listen. He grabbed a flashlight and ran out. We watched the light bounce as he disappeared into the dark. 10 minutes passed. No sound, no movement. Jake finally went after him. I followed close behind. We reached the outhouse. No Evan, just his flashlight on the ground. Still on. No struggle, no blood, just gone. Tracks led away from the outhouse into the woods. Barefoot again, same size. We went back inside, locked everything. The rest of the night was a blur of tapping, whispering, and shadows outside the windows. We didn't sleep. At dawn, we were already packed. We stepped out into silence. Evan's pack still sat inside, untouched. No sign of him, no new footprints. We started hiking, but something was off. The trail markers were gone. Someone had torn them from the trees. We followed Jake's compass, heading east. Walked for hours. Eventually, we found a tree we'd marked earlier with an X. Somehow, we had circled back. We went off trail. No choice. Pushed straight east through brush and branches. I swore I saw faces watching us from behind trees. Once Jake did too. Hours later, we burst out onto a gravel road. A ranger found us. We told him everything. He brought us back. Evan was gone. His stuff was still there. We searched again. Found something behind the cabin. A clearing. Dozens of weird stick figures. Some with feathers, others with bones. One had Evan's jacket liner tied to it. The ranger looked sick. He radioed for help. They never found Evan. Never found where the footprints ended. Nothing. Weeks later, I got a call. A trail camera had picked up something. 3 people, or at least they looked like people, standing outside our cabin. Pale, thin, barefoot, facing the door, faces blank. Nobody recognized them. No one ever saw them again. And Eva never came back. It was late November in Colorado, right before the snow really started falling hard. I was about 7 or 8 years old when my dad got the idea to take our family on a weekend trip to a cabin. He said it would be a good way for all of us to spend time together. Him, my mom, my older sister, and me. My mom loved the idea, especially since we'd all been kind of stuck in our routines. I didn't mind at all. In fact, I was excited because it meant we got to leave a day early from school on Friday. And at that age, nothing beat getting out of class. The drive up was long. The trees got taller and the air got colder the higher we climbed in the mountains. By the time we reached the cabin, it was already dark and freezing. We were surrounded by thick forest, no neighbors in sight. The place looked old, but in a cozy way. It had a small front porch, some steps that creaked under our feet, and a chimney that was already letting out a thin trail of smoke since my dad had arrived earlier in the day to get the fire going. The inside smelled like wood and something sweet, probably the hot chocolate Mom had made in a thermos for the ride. We picked our sleeping spots. My sister got the top bunk, I took the bottom, and our parents had the bedroom next door. We ate dinner, something simple like canned soup and sandwiches, and sat around talking about what we'd do the next day. Maybe hike around the lake nearby, or go exploring through the woods. Nothing big, just family stuff. That first night was quiet at first. We were tucked in a bed, and I was just staring at the wood planks above me, listening to the fire pop in the other room and my sister's breathing above me. But then I heard something outside. It was faint, like slow crunching, footsteps maybe. I sat up and looked toward the window, but I couldn't see anything, just the trees and the light of the moon on the snow. I figured maybe it was an animal and tried to convince myself it was nothing. 15 minutes later, I heard it again, this time closer. Not constant, just a couple of slow steps and then silence. I whispered to my sister, and she woke up annoyed at first, but then she heard it too. We got up and crept to the window, pushing the curtain aside just enough to peek. There was something out there, not an animal. It was standing too upright, but it was far enough away that we couldn't see much detail. We ducked down quick, thinking if we could see it, maybe it could see us. We didn't sleep much that night. I stared at the cabin door, just hoping it would stay shut until the morning. The next day, my mom was already cooking breakfast when we got up. She smiled and said we must have been really tired because we looked like we hadn't slept at all. I asked if I could go outside with Dad, who was already chopping wood or something near the trees. She said sure, as long as I had my coat and gloves. While I stepped outside, my dad wasn't alone. There was a short, chubby man standing near him. The man looked strange. He had a shaved head, a beard that looked a few days unshaven, and he was wearing a dark green veteran cap. But the weird part was how much he was sweating. It was freezing outside. I mean, I had 2 layers on and still felt cold, but this guy was red in the face and beads of sweat were running down the sides of his head. My dad introduced me, and the guy said his name was Patrick. I said hello. He smiled wide, too wide, and his eyes stayed on me just a little too long. I didn't like it. I asked him, probably rudely, if he was scared or something. He kind of coughed and said he had shell shock from being a veteran. He laughed a little like it was a joke, but there was something off about the way he said it. Patrick said his family had rented a cabin nearby, and he'd seen ours from a distance. Said he wanted to be friendly and introduce himself. My dad seemed to like him. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the veteran thing, or the way Patrick acted like he wanted to help chop wood or something. My dad invited him in for breakfast. I stayed outside with them for a bit afterward, throwing snowballs at a tree while they talked. While playing, I slipped on a patch of ice and scraped my knee on a rock under the snow. I started crying a little. It really hurt. My dad had gone inside to help my mom with something, and Patrick ran over to me and said he had Band-Aids at his cabin. He said we could go real quick and come back. I nodded, thinking that sounded okay. I just wanted the sting on my knee to go away. We walked for a long time. His cabin wasn't close. It was way deeper in the woods, like at least a 20-minute walk. The trees started getting thicker, and I remember the light from the sky felt dimmer, even though it wasn't late. When we got there, I noticed something right away. There were no lights on, no sounds, no signs of anyone else being there. He told me to go in first. I did. Inside, it was dark and smelled weird. Not bad, just off. The kind of smell you notice when someone's lived in a place for too long without really cleaning it. I asked where his family was, and he didn't answer. He acted like he didn't hear me. Then he locked the door. I remember the sound of that lock so clearly. It echoed in my ears, and my chest got tight. He said he'd grab a Band-Aid and walked into the kitchen. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there. He came back and handed it to me, told me to sit down so he could put it on. I sat down because I didn't know what else to do. As he put it on my leg, he rubbed up and down with his other hand and said something like, "You're a muscular kid." I like that. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew I didn't like how he said it. I stood up fast and said I felt better and needed to go back. He kept smiling and told me to stay and eat. I didn't know how to say no. The door was locked, and I didn't want to make him mad. He asked how much I weighed, and I guessed around 70 pounds. His smile got bigger, and he nodded like that number meant something to him. I asked to leave again, and he said no. He said things were just getting started. Then there was a loud noise behind one of the doors, someone yelling. He rushed over, opened the door, and shouted something about staying in the room and not moving. Then he came back out, smiling again. He said his wife was sick and couldn't be around visitors. But a few minutes later, she came out of the room anyway. She looked awful, skin pale, eyes red, hair a mess. She said she was hungry. He screamed at her, told her to get back in the room, and she did. I couldn't stop shaking. I asked about his kids. He didn't answer. Instead, he said he had some kids' clothes he wanted me to try on. I started crying. He hugged me, said everything would be okay, and told me to try the clothes. He went to the back room to get them. That was my chance. I quietly walked to the door, unlocked it, and slipped outside. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. I ran, through the snow, through the trees, not looking back. I heard him shouting behind me, screaming at his wife, then calling for me, telling me it was okay and that I could come back for toys. I didn't stop. I ran and ran, trying to keep a straight path. I didn't care if I got lost. I couldn't go back. After what felt like forever, I saw a cabin up ahead. Ours. My dad was outside yelling my name. I ran into his arms, crying. I told him everything. Every detail. What Patrick said and did. How he touched my leg. How he tried to get me to try on clothes. My dad turned pale. He went inside and called the person who rented him the cabin. The guy called the police right away. We left that same day. The next day, we heard back. The man who rented the cabins went with the police to Patrick's cabin. But it was empty. Nobody was there. Just a bunch of clothes, some old food, and his stuff. No sign of his wife. No sign of Patrick. Nothing. The police never followed up. Never gave us answers. It was like he vanished. He hadn't rented the cabin through normal means either. He must have found it empty and stayed there. We never learned his real name. I never found out what happened to that pale woman, or if she was really his wife. I don't know how long he had been living there, but I know one thing. If I hadn't left when I did, something really bad could have happened to me. I still think about it sometimes. About the way he smiled, the way he talked, and the sound of that lock. And I always wonder how many other kids he tried to bring into that cabin, and if anyone ever found out who he really was. There's a reason why I have to be talked into camping every single time it comes up in a conversation with either friends or family. It's not that I hate the outdoors or anything dramatic like that. I actually enjoy nature and quiet walks and fresh air. But when it comes to sleeping arrangements, I just want to lie down in a proper bed at night. I don't want to be tossing and turning on the hard ground in a tent, feeling every little rock in my spine and wondering if something's crawling near my foot. I want to close my eyes under a roof with walls and a door that locks. Simple as that. That year, my boyfriend finally managed to convince me to go on a trip with him and a few friends. He sweetened the deal by telling me we wouldn't be camping in tents. We'd be staying in an actual cabin. An actual structure with electricity, running water, and yes, beds. I still try to vote for a trip to the ocean, maybe a beach rental, but everyone else was all about being deep in the woods by a lake, so I got outvoted. I told myself to just try and enjoy it. And to be fair, once we got there, I started to think maybe I'd been overreacting. There were 6 of us all together, me and my boyfriend, Tina, and her boyfriend, Matt, and another couple, Rachel and Jordan. The cabin we found was small but cozy, nestled in the woods, quiet and tucked away. It was only about 100 yards from a beautiful lake, and when we arrived in the early afternoon, the sun was bouncing off the water like something out of a painting. I had to admit, it was pretty. That first day was actually a lot of fun. We walked a few trails that wrapped around the lake. Nothing too difficult, just enough to feel like we were doing something outdoorsy. The air smelled like pine and fresh water, and I started to relax. We went swimming in the lake for a while, and then came back to the cabin to grill some steaks. We ate on the little patio while the sun dipped behind the trees. That first evening was probably the best part of the trip. It felt peaceful, like the kind of vacation you don't know you needed until you're already there. We all went to bed around midnight. I was exhausted but couldn't sleep well. Every time I started to drift off, I thought I heard something outside. It wasn't a specific noise, more like soft crunching or maybe faint rustling. I kept telling myself I was being silly. We were in the woods. It's normal to hear stuff at night. Animals, wind, branches snapping. Still, it kept me from sleeping deeply. The next morning we were all outside, getting ready to go on a longer hike, when this voice rang out behind us. It was overly cheerful, almost forced in how upbeat it sounded. We all turned around, and this big man came walking up the path toward us. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with a big belly that pushed against his flannel shirt. He had on jeans, hiking boots, and a faded baseball cap. He introduced himself as Wayne and said he lived nearby. He said he heard us talking and just wanted to say hi and see if we were settling in okay. He didn't seem threatening, but something about the whole thing felt off. He was too cheerful. His voice was just a bit too loud, his laugh a little too forced. My boyfriend talked to him more than the rest of us did, asking him about trails and the lake. Wayne claimed to know the area like the back of his hand. After a few minutes, he said he'd let us get back to our day and walked off down one of the trails. We hiked for a few hours, and at first we joked about Wayne a little. He seemed weird but harmless, just one of those small town types who were overly friendly. But the more I thought about it, the more it bugged me that he just showed up like that, uninvited, walking out of the woods. Later in the afternoon, we went down to the lake again. We were all sitting on the dock, just soaking up the sun, when we heard that same voice again from behind us. There they are. It made all of us jump. We turned around, and there was Wayne again, standing right at the edge of the dock. He acted like it was just a coincidence that he ran into us again. My boyfriend started chatting with him like before, but I noticed Matt, and I shared a look. We were both uncomfortable. Wayne kept glancing around while they talked, like he was scanning the area or distracted. And when he walked off, he kept mumbling to himself. Not full sentences, just the word okay over and over. That night we made a fire and decided to tell scary stories. The air had cooled off a bit, and we were all wrapped in hoodies and blankets, passing around a bottle of wine. I still felt a little uneasy, but I didn't say anything. Then, without any warning, Wayne jumped out of the bushes behind us, yelling, "Here I am," and laughing loud enough to echo through the trees. We screamed, every single one of us. I stood up so fast my chair tipped over. It wasn't funny. It wasn't some light-hearted prank. It was terrifying. My boyfriend finally snapped at him, telling him to leave us alone and that it wasn't okay to jump out at people like that, especially not in the middle of the night. Wayne looked genuinely upset, like he didn't understand why we were angry. He said something about just trying to help us make some memories and then turned and wandered off down the path again. I couldn't get comfortable after that. We all went inside, locked the doors, and started cleaning up the cabin since we were planning to leave early the next morning anyway. When we got into bed, I told my boyfriend that something felt wrong. I told him that I didn't think it was just weird. Wayne was unwell. I kept thinking about the noises I'd heard the night before and how they could have been him. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. Every time I started to close my eyes, I'd hear a sound outside. Then, I heard what I was sure was breathing. Slow, steady breathing, like someone was standing just outside the window. And footsteps, soft but definitely footsteps. I shook my boyfriend awake. At first, he was irritated, but then he sat up, peeked out through the curtain and froze. His face went pale, and he whispered that he could see someone pacing in front of the cabin. He said it looked like Wayne. I moved next to him and looked outside as carefully as I could without being seen. Sure enough, Wayne was out there, walking in circles near the porch, mumbling to himself, hitting his head with the palm of his hand. He tried the door. It was locked. When it didn't open, he started to hit his head harder, almost like he was punishing himself. We didn't know what to do. My boyfriend called the owner of the cabin and then the police. A single patrol car showed up maybe 20 minutes later. We explained everything. How Wayne had shown up multiple times, how he'd frightened us, and how we were pretty sure he was the one outside the cabin. The officer listened but didn't seem too alarmed. He wrote some things down, said he'd keep an eye out, and that was it. We packed up our things, made coffee, and sat inside until the sky started turning orange with the sunrise. The second there was enough light, we loaded the car and left. As we were driving down the road that led back to the highway, we saw him again. Wayne, walking by himself on the side of the road, head down, still mumbling, still occasionally smacking himself on the side of the head. We called the police again, told them exactly where we'd seen him, and they said they'd send someone out. I don't know if they ever caught up with him, or if he just wandered back into the woods. I don't know if he actually lives out there, or if he was just passing through, maybe sleeping in the forest, maybe not right in the head. I'm grateful that he didn't hurt us, but I can't stop thinking about what could have happened if we hadn't locked the door, or if one of us had gone outside for any reason during the night. No one really brings up that trip anymore. If they do, they just say something like, "Remember the cabin?" and leave it at that. I never went camping again after that, and I don't think I ever will. They can all go without me from now on. I've had enough memorable experiences to last me a lifetime. It happened about 15 years ago, back when I was still in middle school. My parents had agreed to let me have a little backyard camping night with two of my best friends, Aubrey and May. We were all around 12 or 13 at the time. I still remember how excited we were when my dad set up the big green camping tent for us out on the grass behind our house. My mom bought a bunch of snacks, chips, candy, sodas, juice boxes, and my dad ordered pizza before he and my mom left for dinner. It was a rare night where we were allowed to stay up as late as we wanted, and we had planned out the whole evening with stories, snacks, and what we thought would be harmless fun. As soon as my parents left, we ran out into the backyard carrying bowls of chips, bottles of soda, a Bluetooth speaker, and a stack of blankets and pillows. We tried to drag as much of the food as we could into the tent without dropping anything. I remember how we struggled to set everything up neatly, but it was just a chaotic mess of sleeping bags, junk food wrappers, and laughter. At first, everything felt perfect. The sun had just started to set, and the sky was this warm orange color. There were little bugs flying around, but not too many, and the air was warm enough that we didn't need jackets. We ate pizza, poured sodas into little plastic cups, and just talked for what felt like hours. We shared stories about kids at school, which boys we had crushes on, and who we thought might ask us to dance at the next school event. That was kind of the big deal at that age. Everything felt so lighthearted and simple. After it got dark, we pulled out flashlights and tried to build a little fort inside the tent with the extra blankets and pillows, but it kept collapsing. Still, we were having fun. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I started to feel like I could hear something outside the tent. Not clearly, just little rustling noises every now and then. At first I figured it was the wind or maybe a neighborhood cat, but after the third or fourth time, I unzipped the little mesh screen window on the side of the tent and peeked out. I didn't see anything, just the shadows from our porch light barely reaching the edge of the yard. About 5 minutes later, May said she thought she heard something too. She said it sounded like something brushed up against the side of the tent. Then Aubrey leaned toward the screen I had left open and said she saw something. She pointed and said, "There's something in black over there. Do you see it?" I looked exactly where she was pointing, and at first, it was too dark to see much of anything. But then I noticed this little flash of white, like a swoosh. It hit me all at once. It looked like the Nike symbol, glowing for a second in the darkness. That's when I screamed. Not even a quiet scream either. I screamed loud and hard, and that set everyone else off. All three of us panicked, and sprinted out of the tent, leaving everything behind. We ran into the house as fast as we could and locked ourselves in the bathroom. It was the first room we could all fit into, and we didn't even think about calling anyone at first. We were shaking, trying to whisper about what we saw and if it was just in our heads. Then we heard footsteps, slow ones, right outside the bathroom. The doorknob jiggled just once, then again, like someone was trying to open it quietly. That's when we all started screaming again. Aubrey was already pulling out her phone and calling the police. I remember she had to unlock it with her thumbprint, and her hand was shaking so bad she dropped it once. While she talked to the dispatcher, we kept hearing the knob being turned slowly, like someone was playing with us. I don't know how long that went on before I finally heard my mom's voice calling from outside the door, telling us to come out. We cracked the door open and saw both of my parents standing there. My dad looked startled, but had this sort of nervous grin on his face. Then he said that he had just been playing a joke on us. He had apparently come back from dinner early and thought it would be funny to sneak around the tent to scare us a little. I couldn't believe it. Aubrey was still holding the phone, and my dad quickly apologized to the dispatcher before hanging up. We were all angry, especially after how scared we were, but my dad was always a bit of a jokester. He seemed genuinely sorry, too. He offered to make it up to us by starting the fire pit and helping us make s'mores. He even brought out blankets and set up chairs, played some light music, and kept asking if we needed anything else. I think he knew he took a little too far. Eventually, we calmed down and started to enjoy ourselves again. We sat by the fire, toasted marshmallows, and just talked. It was nice, honestly. My dad stayed with us outside for a while, probably trying to make sure we didn't completely hate him. After a couple hours, we got tired and went back to the tent. It was cozy again. We had all 3 sleeping bags laid out side by side and kept talking about random stuff until one by one, we drifted off. I think I was the last one awake. I just wanted to make sure my friends were okay, maybe keep watch a little after everything that happened. I was lying there, staring at the ceiling of the tent when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. No music, no fire crackling, just the sound of crickets and my friends breathing softly in their sleep. It was comforting in a weird way until I started hearing that same heavy breathing again. At first, I thought maybe one of my friends was just in a deep sleep, but it kept getting louder, slower. It didn't sound right. I sat up slowly and looked around. The moonlight was barely shining through the mesh screen, but just enough that I could make out shapes. That's when I saw something move on the other side of the screen. A quick shadow. Then I heard the zipper of the tent door being pulled down. I didn't think. I just assumed my dad was back at it again and trying to scare us. I whispered loud enough, "Dad, knock it off." That was enough earlier, but nothing happened. The zipper kept going down. My friends were starting to stir now, groggy and confused. I raised my voice, telling him to stop, that we wanted to actually enjoy the rest of our night. Then a voice answered, low and rough, almost like it was struggling to come out. It said, "How do you know it's me?" Everything inside me froze. My heart felt like it stopped and I couldn't move. That voice wasn't my dad's. It was deeper, slower, and way too calm. I reached over and grabbed my friend's arms and yanked them toward the tent door leading into the yard. We didn't even stop to grab our stuff. We just ran, full speed, barefoot across the grass and straight back into the house. I think my friends were still too out of it to fully process what was happening, but I ran straight into my parents' room and started yelling about what just happened. My dad didn't say a word. He jumped out of bed, grabbed something off his nightstand, and went outside. I could hear him shouting into the yard, but I couldn't make out the words. A few minutes later, I heard him on the phone. He was calling the police. My mom stayed with us in the living room. She made us sit down, asked us over and over if we were okay, and kept looking toward the front window. Eventually, we saw the red and blue lights outside. The police stayed for maybe 20 minutes. My dad talked to them the whole time. We tried to listen, but couldn't hear much. After they left, my dad sat us all down and told us that someone had apparently been walking around the neighborhood, causing trouble. The police found him trying to get into someone's backyard a few blocks away. They caught him. I didn't know what to say. My dad apologized again and said he never should have messed around earlier. He told us we were safe now, that the guy was gone. They called her mom and went home. She didn't say much. Aubrey stayed, but we didn't go back to the tent. We brought all our pillows and blankets into the living room, and my dad helped us make a little fort using the couch cushions and extra sheets. He stayed up with us until we were too tired to keep our eyes open. The next morning, we woke up early. My mom made pancakes, eggs, and sausage. My dad looked like he hadn't slept at all. He asked how we were doing and if we wanted to hang out by the pool that day to take our minds off everything. That actually helped a lot. The sun was out, the pool water was warm, and we just floated around for hours without really talking about what had happened. Aubrey and I are still friends to this day, and every now and then we bring up that night. We always say it was the last time either of us tried camping, and honestly, I think we meant it. I just turned 17 and finally got my driver's license. That freedom felt unreal at first, like all those late nights spent studying the DMV manual had suddenly paid off in the form of me sitting behind the wheel of my dad's old Nissan. It wasn't anything fancy, a silver Altima with some dents along the back bumper and a slight shake in the steering at higher speeds. But to me, it was the key to everything. It meant I didn't have to wait around for anyone anymore. I could go wherever I wanted, whenever I wanted. At school, a couple of my friends and I had this dumb tradition. We'd go hunting for abandoned houses. Not like full-on urban exploration or anything. We were just bored high school kids who thought it'd be cool to throw parties in places no one else could. Most of the time, we just drive out to the edge of town where construction had slowed down or completely stopped and look for unfinished homes or older places that looked like no one lived there anymore. We never actually threw any parties in them, but the idea was exciting. It gave us something to talk about. One day after work, this was a summer evening, probably around late July, I was driving back from my shift at the car wash. It was one of those jobs you take because it's easy and it pays just enough. I was cruising down this road that cut through a developing neighborhood on the edge of town. It was mostly empty lots and half-built houses. There was one place in particular I passed every time that stood out. It was this massive two-story house, just a shell, really, with no windows, no front door, just wide, open spaces where things were supposed to be. The driveway was paved though, and there were construction materials scattered around like someone had started to build and then just stopped completely. Weeds had started to grow tall around the place, and a couple of crows always seemed to be hanging around on the roof frame. I'd always noticed it, but this time I slowed down more than usual and actually turned into the gravel entrance. I didn't go in, just pulled up close enough to get a better look. The sun had just dipped below the trees, and it was starting to get dark, but not fully night yet. Those dusky hours where your headlights are on, but they don't do much. I remember it clearly because the entire place had this weird stillness about it. There weren't any other houses nearby yet. Just this lone skeleton of a house, standing there half-finished and silent. The next day, I told my friend Darren about it. We were hanging out before catching a late movie, just killing time. I said, "You gotta see this house I found." And without much more than that, we were in my car heading down that same road. It was a warm evening, and the windows were down. We had music playing low, some old hip-hop station I liked that always came in fuzzy near the edges of town. I wasn't planning to go inside or anything, just wanted to show him what I've been talking about. When we pulled into the gravel driveway, I had my headlights on. The house looked even bigger now, with the sky getting darker behind it. I remember thinking it looked like the kind of place where something bad had already happened and we were just showing up too late to notice. We didn't even get out of the car, just sat there for maybe 10 seconds, both of us looking up at the place. I was about to back out and head to the main road again when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. I didn't think anything of it at first, just figure it was someone else turning in. But as I backed out and started heading toward the stoplight, I realized the truck behind us wasn't just following. It was right behind us. Big pickup, dark colored, maybe black or dark blue, with high beams on and practically kissing my bumper. I tried to stay calm. I kept my hand steady on the wheel and said something stupid to Darren like, "Don't look, but I think we've got company." He didn't say anything. I could tell he was watching the mirror too. The truck stayed on us the whole way to the corner, and when I slowed down at the light, the truck slowed too. I took a right onto the main road, hoping it'd just keep going. But instead, the guy cut through the gas station at the corner, diagonal like he didn't even care about traffic, and pulled out in front of us, blocking the road. I slammed on the brakes. For a second, I just stared, The truck stopped right there, sideways across both lanes. It wasn't just blocking us, it was trapping us. Then the driver's door opened, and this man got out. He was huge, like easily 6'4", broad shoulders, thick arms, wearing this sleeveless, dirty shirt and cargo pants. He didn't run up to us, just walked fast like he'd done this before. I could feel my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Darren was frozen beside me, staring straight ahead. I had my window half down already because the AC didn't work great in my car, and I liked the air. I thought about rolling it up, but it was too late. He was already there. He rapped on the glass hard. I looked up at him, and he just stared. I rolled the window down maybe 2 more inches and said something like, "Hey, sorry," but he didn't say anything right away. Just leaned in and looked inside the car. It felt like he was memorizing our faces. His eyes didn't move much, just flicked between us and the dash. Then he asked, "What were you doing at the house?" No emotion in his voice, just flat. I blurted something about making a U-turn, that we got turned around. I didn't even believe myself, but it was the first thing that came to mind. He kept staring. I could smell something on him, like oil and sweat and maybe gasoline. Then he smiled, just a little, like the kind of smile someone gives you when they know something you don't. Then, without saying another word, he turned and walked back to his truck. He backed up just enough for me to squeeze around and drive off. I didn't wait. I floored it, tires chirping a little, and we got back on the main road. The guy didn't follow us, just stood there in the headlights of his truck, watching us go. We didn't say anything for a long time, just silence and the hum of the engine and our breathing. Eventually Darren said, "That wasn't normal," and I agreed. I was still gripping the wheel too tight. My arms felt locked. We didn't go to the movie. I dropped him off at his place and went straight home. Didn't sleep much that night. Kept thinking about the way the man had looked at us, like he knew everything. Our names, our families, our routines. I still pass that house sometimes. It's been years now. I'm in college, different city, different life. But when I visit home and take that old route, I always slow down as I approach that lot. The house is still unfinished. Same frame, same driveway. Looks exactly like it did back then. No new work, no new signs of life. Just weeds and dust and silence. The weirdest part? There's always a truck parked way in the back now. Not visible from the road unless you really squint through the trees. Same color, same shape. I've never seen anyone get out of it. Never seen anyone go in. I never told my parents. Never called the police. What would I even say? That some guy scared us one night near an abandoned house? But know what I felt? That house isn't just abandoned. Something's going on there. Something we weren't supposed to see. Maybe drugs, maybe something worse. I'll never know for sure. But I've never gone back, and I never will. This is a true story. Every time I tell it, people stop what they're doing and just stare. I don't know why it still feels surreal when I think back on it, but it does. It happened in the summer of 2020 when the world was still strange and half shut down. My friends Alex, Violet, and I were dying to get out of the city. After months of being cooped up indoors, we were going stir crazy. Cabin fever had eaten its way into our brains. We were all working from home, barely seeing anyone, and the stress of the pandemic just kept building. We started talking about taking a trip somewhere isolated, somewhere surrounded by nature. Something where we could get away from the noise and the fear and just breathe for a while. We picked a mountainous state, I won't say which one, and made plans to spend about a week camping and hiking at a few different locations. Nothing fancy, just some fresh air and space. One night, for fun, we decided to book a cabin instead of sleeping in tents. It felt like a nice break in the middle of the trip. The one we found was next to an old fire tower that people could sometimes visit. It was cheap, looked clean from the pictures, and was completely secluded. It was the only building anywhere near the top of a mountain, and the idea of having a place all to ourselves felt exciting. We imagined loud music, stupid games, and being as obnoxious as we wanted without having to worry about anyone complaining. In the weeks before we left, Violet brought up the idea of bringing acid. It wasn't new for us. We tripped together a couple of times before in controlled environments, and it always felt manageable and kind of bonding. She brought a full sheet with her, tucked into her bag the morning we left. I remember backing the car out of my driveway, watching the road blur by, and just feeling this deep unease in my stomach, like a heaviness that I couldn't shake. I told them I didn't want to do acid that night, not in a place we didn't know, not that far away from help. Violet got really upset. Alex tried to play peacekeeper, but the argument got bad enough that we almost turned back home. Still, I stood my ground. I couldn't explain it, but everything in my body was saying no. Eventually, the tension settled, and we kept driving. The road to the cabin was rough. It was barely a road, just a winding, cracked path through the trees, all uphill, no signs, no guardrails. No other cabins, no campsites, just one long, winding road that led to the top. We didn't pass a single car coming down, and there was nowhere to turn off. We had no clue how long it had been since the last people had stayed there. The cabin itself was a small wooden structure just a few yards away from the base of the fire tower. The tower was old and metal, with a staircase spiraling up to the lookout deck. We unpacked quickly and lit a fire outside to stay warm. It was early evening, but the sun was dropping fast, and the shadows between the trees made everything feel a little too dark already. The air up there was thin and crisp, and there was a stillness that made the crackling of the fire sound unnaturally loud. As night fell, we heard the sound of an engine. That was the first time I remember the three of us looking at each other in silence. Then headlights appeared on the road below, weaving up toward us. A side-by-side utility vehicle with 3 kids, and it pulled up near the tower. They gave us a wave, smiled, then climbed the tower. They hung around up top for a few minutes, then drove back down. We had read in the cabin's online listing that the fire tower occasionally had visitors, so we weren't surprised. If anything, it was a little comforting to see actual people out there. After they left, we doused the fire, went inside, and cooked some hot dogs on the little propane burner in the kitchen. It wasn't much of a meal, but it was enough. We ate fast and didn't talk much. The silence outside had become heavy, the kind of silence that presses against the windows and makes your own breath sound too loud. The only thing we could hear was the wind moving through the trees and the occasional creak of the old wood the cabin was made of. I didn't realize how much background noise there usually is until it was completely gone. No cars, no sirens, no appliances humming. Just us, the trees, and the wind. Every time we heard a branch snap, we froze. Every gust of wind made us glance toward the windows. Eventually, I grabbed a few wine coolers from the little cooler we had brought and passed them out. I needed to loosen up, and it seemed like the others did too. I found an old board game in the closet and threw it down on the table between our bunks. We started playing, and within an hour, we were laughing. Not drunk, just relaxed enough to enjoy ourselves. For the first time since we arrived, it started to feel like the night we had planned. Later, I would remember hearing something in the background, like an engine, faint and low, maybe further down the hill. And maybe the occasional crack of a branch, but I ignored it. We all ignored it. None of us wanted to break the mood. That's when the hand slapped the window. 3 loud, distinct smacks. It was a small window between our bunks, just above the table. There was no curtain, just glass. The slap echoed in the cabin like a gunshot. All of us jumped up instantly. I don't even remember if we screamed first or just stared. I think Alex was the first to move. He pulled out his phone and called 911. No hesitation. He put on speaker and handed it to me while he grabbed the fireplace pokers and passed them around. Violet started shaking. Then she began calling her family, just saying goodbye, over and over. She thought we were going to die. I wasn't far behind her in that thinking. I couldn't stop listening, trying to hear more footsteps or voices or anything. But there was nothing. Whoever had slapped the window had heard us call for help and decided to be quiet. They didn't run off crashing through the woods. They retreated in silence. The police arrived maybe 20 minutes later. I don't know how they got up that road so fast, but I was never more grateful to see flashing lights. They brought dogs and combed the mountain. They found nothing, not a single footprint. They told us it might have been a bear. That's what they're supposed to say, I guess. But there's no way it was a bear. We barely cooked those hot dogs. The only heat source was inside, and there were no food scraps outside. And why would a bear slap a window like a person? Why not go for the smell of food instead of the sound of voices? Why sneak off quietly instead of running when when we screamed. None of it added up. The officers told us they saw a car parked at the base of the mountain as they were driving up, just sitting there on the side of the road. No one inside, no one nearby. That's when my blood ran cold. We hadn't passed any cars. There was nowhere else to go. That road only led to the cabin. If that car was there, it meant someone had stopped and walked the rest of the way up in the dark just to reach us. When we got outside to leave, Violet screamed. Her car, which had been coated in a fine layer of mountain dust from the drive up, was covered in handprints. All over the sides, on the back window, on the roof. Dozens of them. Smears in the dust where someone had dragged their fingers or maybe leaned up against the door. Places none of us had touched. Someone had walked around the whole vehicle, inspecting it, watching us. We threw everything we had into the trunk without a second thought. We didn't even try to organize or pack properly. We just wanted off that mountain. We followed the police down, every dip and pothole feeling like a step back towards safety. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about that car. Who parks in the middle of nowhere at 1 a.m.? Who climbs a steep, winding road in the dark without a flashlight just to sneak up on a cabin? It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a wild animal. It was someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who didn't want to be heard. Someone who planned every step of what they were doing. I don't know what they wanted. I don't want to know. Maybe they were hoping we'd be too out of it to defend ourselves. Maybe if we had taken the acid like Violet wanted, we wouldn't have even noticed the hand on the window until it was too late. I've never been back to that state. I'll never go back to that mountain. We never found out who it was or why they were there. But I think about that car, that hand on the window, those prints in the dust, and I'm just glad we didn't stay another night. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion. It was one of those big, noisy gatherings where people you barely know hug you like they've missed you their whole life. I wasn't planning to stay overnight like the others because I had work the next morning. I figured I could tough it out. It was just a 2-hour drive, and I'd done worse. The reunion was about an hour and a half outside the city, tucked deep in a small rural town where houses were few and fields stretched on for miles. It was already late when I left, sometime around 10:30 at night. The sky was pitch black, not city dark, but country dark, where you can't see past the line of your headlights. The road I was on was long and narrow, winding through dense woods and over small hills. There were no streetlights, just the trees, the night, and the occasional flicker of headlights from cars coming the opposite way. Those cars were few and far between though, maybe one every 5 or 10 minutes. I had been driving for about 45 minutes when the tiredness hit me. Not a slow build-up, but the kind of fatigue that feels like someone's pulling your eyelids down with string. My head kept drooping, my focus slipping. I remember blinking hard at the road, trying to keep myself awake. I rolled the window down a few inches, thinking the cold air might help. I turned the radio up, even slapped my cheek a few times. But it didn't help. I knew I couldn't make it the rest of the way home like that. It wasn't safe. I started looking for a gas station, a rest stop, even just a well-lit shoulder. But the stretch of road I was on didn't offer much. It was all forest and ditches and thick bushes hugging both sides. No open lots, no shoulder wide enough to feel safe. Still, I didn't want to fall asleep at the wheel and end up in a tree. So I made a bad call. I saw a gap in the bushes on the right side of the road. Not big, but just enough. I slowed down, turned the wheel gently, and pulled off the road. The tires dipped a bit into the grass and dirt, but it leveled out behind the bushes. From the road, no one would be able to see the car unless they were really looking. I checked the time, 11:22. I remember it clearly because I made a mental note of it, thinking I'd just rest my eyes for 20 minutes or so. I left the engine off, locked the doors, and reclined my seat a little. The air was cool. It was dead quiet outside. No wind, no animals, just stillness. Within minutes, I was asleep. What woke me up was a noise, a scratching sound, not loud but sharp, like something brushing or scraping the side of the car. It startled me awake. I sat up halfway, disoriented, heart already pounding a little. I looked at the dash clock, 11:50. I sat still and listened, but the sound had already stopped. My brain was foggy. It didn't feel urgent. I told myself it was probably an animal. A raccoon, maybe. I didn't look around much. Just leaned back again and closed my eyes. The next time I woke up, it was worse. Same sound, scratching. But it didn't stop. It went on, like claws dragging across the metal. My body went cold. I sat up fast this time, heart hammering. I stared ahead for a few seconds, trying to get my bearings. The clock now said 12:40. Almost an hour had passed. Something was wrong. The noise was coming from the rear of the car, maybe near the trunk or just behind it. I didn't dare move at first. My instincts were firing off like crazy, and my first thought wasn't an animal. It was that something or someone was out there. I reached for the switch and turned on the cabin lights. That made the inside of the car feel a bit less like a coffin. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I saw movement. A figure. Not clearly, just the silhouette of something retreating fast into the trees. It was tall, fast, and definitely human. My chest tightened. I didn't even try to process it. I turned the engine on, slammed it into drive, and peeled out of there, ripping through grass and gravel until I hit pavement. I remember the tires skidding slightly as I overcorrected on the road, but I got back on track. I just kept driving, hands shaking on the wheel. I looked in the mirror again. Nothing. Just the empty road disappearing into the dark. I must have gone only a few hundred feet when I saw it. There was a car parked just off the road up ahead. At first, it didn't even register until I got closer. The driver's door was wide open. No lights, no hazard blinkers. Just a silent, open car with no one in sight. I slowed down, not stopping but rolling by slow enough to look inside. The interior was dark, empty, no movement, no sounds, just an abandoned vehicle, or so it seemed. And then, as I looked in my mirror again, I saw him. A man, sprinting full speed around the same bend I had just come from. His body low, like he was chasing something. But he wasn't chasing, he was charging. At me. I didn't wait. I pressed the gas as hard as I could, and the car lurched forward. I kept checking the mirror, watching as he ran into the road, arms flailing. He screamed something I couldn't hear through the windows. His face was twisted with rage, his mouth wide open. Then he disappeared behind me as I took the next bend at well over the speed limit. I didn't stop driving until I was back on the main highway with gas stations and traffic and other people. I stopped at a brightly lit gas station and sat there for almost an hour. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't call the cops. I didn't even get out of the car. I just sat there with the doors locked, engine running, heart still thudding like it wanted out of my chest. Every time a car pulled in, I watched it closely, half expecting to see that same man behind the wheel. When I finally got home, it was past 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I sat up all night in my living room with every light on. The next morning, I called out of work and went outside to check the car. The passenger side rear panel had faint scratch marks across the paint. Thin, long lines, like fingers. 5 of them. I've never told anyone in my family. I know how it sounds. I can't even explain it properly myself. Maybe it was a trap, some kind of setup. Maybe someone saw me pull over and decided to mess with me. Or maybe worse, the car up the road, the open door, the man chasing me. I don't think it was a coincidence. I think I was being lured into something. That whole night plays over in my head more often than I'd like to admit. Every time I drive on a long stretch of road at night, I think about what could have happened if I hadn't left when I did. What if I hadn't heard the scratching? What if I had gotten out to check the noise the first time? What if I had slowed down just a little more when I passed that empty car? Whatever the answers are, I don't want to know. But I do know one thing now. I'll never sleep on the side of the road again. Not for a minute. Not even with the doors locked. It's not worth the risk. Because no matter how quiet it is, no matter how alone you think you are, someone could be watching, waiting. My house sits farther back on the lot than most other houses in the neighborhood. When you drive down the street, you can barely see it from the road. There's a long, cracked sidewalk that cuts through the front yard like a scar, running the length of the living room and ending at the front porch, which is narrow and doesn't really feel like a place anyone would want to sit. The house is small, built sometime in the 60s, I think, with a weird layout. The front of the house is basically one big room, the living room, with these massive windows that don't open. They stretch almost from floor to ceiling. During the day, They let in a ton of sunlight, and I used to like that. The house always felt warm and bright, like it was open to the world. But at night, those same windows turn into black mirrors. You can't see out, but someone standing outside can see everything inside. That part never really sat right with me. The living room connects to a short hallway that leads to the rest of the house. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and the kitchen tucked off to the back. It's not a big place, not fancy either, but it's home. My parents and little sister had gone on a week-long vacation to Florida. I had to work and couldn't get the time off, so I stayed behind. I'd never had the house to myself for that long before, and I was honestly looking forward to it. I had all these ideas in my head: binge some movies, eat junk food, maybe get drunk, sleep in without anyone bugging me. That first night alone, I did exactly that. I ordered a pizza, started a movie, and cracked open a few beers. I'm not a big drinker, but I hadn't had a chance to really relax in weeks. 1 beer turned into 3, then 4, and by the time it hit 9 o'clock, I could feel the room starting to tilt a little. I was lying on the couch in the living room, right under those big windows. The lights were off, except for the glow from the TV. I remember feeling too lazy to get up and walk down the hallway to my bedroom. It was stupid, but being alone in the dark house gave me this weird feeling I couldn't shake, like something was watching me. I decided I'd just sleep on the couch for the night. I must have passed out not long after that. I woke up all of a sudden. No sounds, nothing obvious, just that snap into awareness like when you know something is wrong. My heart was pounding, and I had this deep chill running through my body like I'd been dipped in cold water. The blanket I had thrown over myself had slipped off during the night, and the air in the room felt colder than it should have been. I sat there, completely still, trying to understand why I was awake. Then the banging started. It was loud, sharp, 3 quick, hard bangs right above me. I froze. My whole body tensed. I didn't move my head, just shifted my eyes up toward the windows. And that's when I saw him. There was a man standing outside the window, right there. He wasn't leaning close or pressing his face against the glass, but I could see him clearly in the ambient glow from the porch light. He was wearing dark clothes, couldn't tell the exact colors, but I could see his hands balled into fists hitting the glass again. He was looking directly into the house, directly at me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just laid there, my mind racing, trying to convince myself that maybe it was a dream. Maybe I was still drunk. Maybe he'd go away. He didn't. He kept banging. Harder. Louder. He wasn't yelling, didn't say a word, just kept hitting the window like he wanted in. The whole glass pane shook with each hit. I glanced over at the cable box. It was 3:04 a.m. I didn't have anything near me. No weapon. My phone was plugged into the wall by the kitchen. The hallway to my room felt like a mile away, and I couldn't bring myself to move. I was terrified that if I stood up, he'd see me do it, and I don't know what that would have triggered. I was trying to stay invisible, even though I knew he could already see me. Then it stopped, just like that. No more banging. He stepped back, and for a brief second I thought maybe he was leaving. I still didn't move. I kept staring out the window, waiting for some kind of sign that it was over. Then the banging started again, but not just on the window. Now, it was coming from the front door too. The front porch was maybe 6 feet away from the window. Someone else had joined him, or he had circled around. I couldn't be sure. Either way, the front door was being pounded on with the same force, like whoever was out there had lost patience. Bang, bang, bang. Then on the window again. I still didn't move. I just laid there, frozen in place, every muscle in my body locked up. My eyes flicked between the window and the door, back and forth. I was half expecting the door to burst open for glass to shatter. This went on for what felt like forever. Probably 40 minutes, maybe more. The sound was maddening. No breaks, no talking, just relentless pounding. Then it all stopped. Dead quiet. No footsteps. No retreating car. Nothing. I stayed frozen for at least another half hour, too scared to move. Eventually, I forced myself up, tiptoed to the kitchen, grabbed my phone, and quietly locked myself in the bathroom. I didn't call the cops. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to explain how I'd been drinking, or maybe I just didn't want to talk to anyone. I sat there until the sun started to rise. When I finally walked outside later that morning, I saw the smudges. Handprints on the window. Faint, but definitely there. A few on the front door, too. It wasn't just in my head. I didn't sleep that night or the night after. I called a friend to ask if he could come stay the rest of the week with me. He laughed it off and said no way. I didn't push him. I couldn't blame him. The rest of that week, I kept every light on in the house. Slept with a kitchen knife under my pillow. I barely slept at all. Every sound made me jump. I checked the windows and doors constantly, triple-checked the locks. I even moved a dresser in front of the front door at night. Nothing else happened. They didn't come back, but that fear didn't go away. I eventually told my family what happened when they got home. My dad checked the door and windows, said it was probably some drunk kids messing around. But I knew better. That kind of force and silence wasn't some stupid prank. That wasn't random. I still live here, and I've never passed out in the living room again. I got curtains installed, thick ones. I keep them closed at night every night. I also bought cameras, one for the porch, one pointing at the sidewalk, and another aimed right at the living room window. I check the footage every morning, just in case. I had the annual fishing trip. It was the one thing that mattered most. After Mom died, it became our thing, me and Dad. A quiet agreement we never had to talk about. 1 week a year, we left the city behind. No phones, no work, no school, no noise, just the two of us and the river. That was the deal. Usually, that meant loading up the old Ford Ranger and driving out to the Russian River Ferry, finding a crowded spot along the bank with every other guy in the state trying to get their limit. Elbow to elbow, rod to rod. But this year was different. For my 17th birthday, a last hurrah before senior year, came down like a weight. Dad surprised me. He booked a flying cabin on the Upper Kenai. No roads, no people, just us. A log cabin and one of the most powerful salmon rivers in the world. I still remember the way my chest tightened when he told me. The excitement was something deeper than just fishing. It was the idea that he still wanted this with me. Even now, even after everything. The flight and was on a de Havilland Beaver, one of those old school bush planes with the pontoons. The pilot was an older guy, maybe in his 60s, didn't talk much. But he flew like he was part of the landscape. The view below us was endless. Green hills and dark valleys rolled out in all directions, stitched together with fingers of blue water and silver glinting streams. The Kenai cut through it all like a ribbon of turquoise. It looked unreal, like someone had spilled paint across the land. When we landed, it was like gliding down onto glass. The plane touched the water, skimmed across it, and slowed to a gentle stop. The pilot helped us off, waved once, and took off again. And then we were alone. The cabin stood just back from the river's edge. Dark logs stacked with tight corners and a wide porch that stood on short stilts above the soft earth. The door creaked on old hinges, and inside was a single room with 2 bunks, a wood stove, and a rough wooden table. Everything smelled of pine and old smoke. I stood in the middle of it and just breathed. It was perfect. The first day was the kind of day you don't get more than a few times in your life. The sun was out, but the air was cool and clean. The river's cold bite hit us right through our waders as we stepped into the current. It was fast, strong. You had to plant your feet and feel the bottom with your toes, always aware of what could knock you down. Dad stood beside me, pointing out the seams in the current where the sockeye might rest. He still had the same calm, patient tone, like he was teaching me for the first time. And we were good. Whether it was skill or luck, we hit our limit by the afternoon. The fish were strong, silver with flashes of red along their sides, and they fought like they wanted to pull us under. By the time we were done, my arms ached and my fingers were numb, but I felt more alive than I had in months. That night, we cooked our catch on the cast iron skillet over the stove. The cabin filled with the smell of sizzling fish with smoke and the faint, sweet burn of the whiskey Dad let me taste. He didn't say much, just handed me the flask and nodded. It burned my throat and made my chest feel warm. I remember thinking, I'll remember this forever. The fire burned low, and the cabin fell into a soft orange glow. We each settled into our bunks. I could hear the river, muted through the logs, a constant sound like the world breathing. That was when the fog rolled in. It didn't drift. It moved, thick, white, like milk spilling between the trees. The air felt colder, heavier. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and tried to sleep. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It was light, faint but clear. 3 steady taps on the wall facing the river. My eyes opened and I listened. At first, I thought it was a tree limb. A spruce stood near that side. Maybe the wind had picked up, but the sound was too regular, too intentional. I sat up. The fire was down to embers, casting long shadows. Across from me, Dad was already awake. He hadn't moved, but his head was up, turned toward the wall. He wasn't looking at it. He was listening. He got up quietly, walked to the door, and slowly unlatched it. He cracked it open an inch. Cold air flowed in, sharp and damp. The fog outside was solid white. No sound, no movement. The tapping stopped the second he opened the door. He stood there for a long time, then shut it and relatched it. We didn't say a word. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same sound. Again on the third night. No marks on the wall. No footprints in the dirt. Nothing. Just a sound. And then nothing. On the 4th day, we hiked down river to a gravel bar where the water slowed a little. It was wide and quiet. The fishing was slow, but I didn't care. I let my line drift and snagged something under the water. I cursed, thinking it was a log. I waded in carefully and reached down. I grabbed something hard and heavy. I pulled it out. It wasn't a log. It was a lure. A primitive one. 5 inches long. Carved from yellowed bone into a fish shape. It smelled faintly of old rot. The line was thick like braided animal sinew, dried hard as leather. The hook was obsidian, black, glossy, and flaked to a sharp edge. It looked ancient, and it looked used. I showed Dad. He took it, turned it in his hand, then dropped it like it burned. "Leave it," he said, his voice tight. "Leave it here." That night, the fog came earlier. It was so thick you couldn't see the edge of the porch. We stood outside, listening to the river. Then we saw him. He was standing waist deep in the current, in the fast water where no one could stand. He was tall, too tall, gaunt, his limbs too long. His head was dark and oval, no face, no features. He didn't move, just stood there, the water raging around him. Then his arm came up. There was a flick of movement, and something shot from his wrist, a line. It flew like a dart, hit the water 20 yards downstream, and came back fast. A salmon was impaled on the end. It writhed and twisted. He didn't reel it in. He just held it. Then his head turned. Slowly. Wrongly. It turned too far, too smooth, like it wasn't attached the way it should be. And it faced us. There were no eyes. No mouth. Just blackness. But I knew it saw us. It looked right into me. It didn't move. It just stared. Then it turned and disappeared into the fog. Back inside, Dad packed fast. No talk. Just action. I followed, stuffing gear into my day pack, hands shaking. Then the knock started. Not taps. Knocks. On the door. Then the back wall. Then the roof. Fast. Heavy. Like something circling. Then a new sound came. A clicking. Like pebbles snapping underwater. It wasn't loud, but it was everywhere. Then came the scrape. Something dragged slowly down the front of the cabin. Then the wooden bar on the door began to tremble. Creak. Creak. It was going to break. Dad moved. Fast. He didn't look at the door. He looked at the window. Then he punched it. Shattered the glass with his blanket-wrapped fist. Cleared the frame and shoved me through. I landed hard, packed thumping into my spine. He was right behind me. Then we ran. Not fast. Not loud. But steady. Upriver. Into the trees. The fog swallowed us. The sound followed. Splash. 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 Something was keeping pace with us in the river. Big. Heavy. Too fast for a man in water that deep. The clicking kept up too. From a woods now. From both sides. We moved all night. Silent, cold, wet. The forest was a mess of roots, thorny undergrowth, and slick moss. Every breath was a struggle. Every step a risk. The splashing in the river stayed with us. At one point, the noise stopped. Total silence. Then we heard the dragging. Something huge pulling itself in the river. Slosh. Drag. Slosh. Drag. The stench hit a moment later. Mud. Fish. Death. We hid behind a fallen tree. The thing passed close. So close I could smell it in my lungs. Then it moved on. Back to the water. The splashing resumed. We kept moving until the light began to shift. The black gave way to gray. The fog thinned a little. We found a trail, and then we saw it. The ranger station. A cabin. Real. Smoke from the chimney. I fell to my knees. A man opened the door. He didn't ask what happened. He just got us inside. Blankets. Tea. Warmth. Dad told him everything. Calm. Exact. Like a report. The ranger listened. Said nothing. Then pulled out a book. Old. Leather. Inside a sketch. A figure. In the river. Too tall. Too thin. Just like what we saw. He called it the Nantina. A spirit of the river. Not a ghost. Not a monster. A presence. Old. Territorial. Real. We were lucky. That's what he said. We didn't challenge it. We left. The next day, he radioed for pickup. Said we got turned around in fog. Exposure. That was it. The plane ride back was quiet. Dad didn't talk. I didn't either. But I saw it in his eyes. We both knew the truth. We weren't fishing anymore. We had trespassed. And we got out alive. A few years ago, I decided to rent a cabin deep in the woods of northern Michigan. I had just finished a long, exhausting work contract and needed time to breathe. My phone had been ringing off the hook for weeks, and I was tired of emails, texts, calls. I wanted to be alone. I looked online and found a listing for an old but well-kept cabin near Small Lake. No neighbors, no traffic, no cell service. That was exactly what I wanted. The drive took most of the day. After turning off the main highway, I drove for what felt like hours on narrow, winding roads, eventually turning onto a dirt path that looked more like a hiking trail than a driveway. Tall trees hung over both sides, and the deeper I went, the darker it felt. It wasn't scary at first, just isolated. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, it was already early evening. The cabin looked older than it had in the pictures. The wood was weathered and faded. A small porch wrapped around the front, and a dusty rocking chair sat in the corner. It was dead silent outside. No wind, no birds, not even bugs. I stood there for a minute with the car still running, just staring at it. I don't know why, but I felt uneasy from the moment I got out of the car. Inside, it smelled like wood and something else, maybe mildew. The main room had a fireplace, a couch, a table, and a small kitchenette with outdated appliances. There were 2 bedrooms in the back. I picked the one with the bigger window, mostly so I wouldn't feel boxed in. I put my bag on the bed and walked around, just getting familiar with everything. The place creaked a lot. Every step on the old floorboards made a sharp, dry sound that echoed across the walls. There was no TV, no radio, and no clock. I hadn't even brought a book. I just sat there listening to nothing. That first night was quiet. I made a quick dinner, sat on the porch for a while, then went to bed early. The silence was strange, but not threatening. I woke up once during the night to pee and noticed how absolutely pitch black it was outside. Not a single star, not even the faintest bit of moonlight. I couldn't see past the glass. It felt like the world outside the window didn't exist anymore. I remember thinking about that while lying back in bed, staring at the ceiling. It was an odd thought, but I shrugged it off and eventually fell back asleep. The next morning I woke up early. It was bright outside, which was comforting. I made coffee and took a walk down to the lake, which was only a few minutes away through a short trail. The water was still like a sheet of glass, and there wasn't a single ripple or sound. I didn't see any birds or insects or fish. It was beautiful, but too perfect. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes before heading back. Later that day, while I was sitting on the porch eating lunch, I noticed something strange. Across the dirt driveway, maybe 50 feet into the woods, I saw what looked like a large piece of tree bark propped upright. It didn't seem natural. I didn't remember seeing it when I arrived. I walked over to it, and the closer I got, the more I realized it wasn't bark. It was a slab of plywood, leaned against a tree. There were scratches on it, thin, vertical lines, almost like claw marks, but not from an animal. They were too evenly spaced, too purposeful. I stood there staring at it for a while before backing away and heading back to the cabin. That night, something changed. I locked the doors and windows before bed and left a small light on in the main room. Sometime around midnight, I woke up because of a sound. It was faint but clear, something moving outside like footsteps on the dry leaves. I held my breath and listened. The steps weren't rushed. They were slow, steady, crunching the ground with each movement. Then they stopped, right outside the window. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stared at the ceiling in the darkness, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I waited for what felt like forever. Nothing happened. No knocking, no sound, just silence again. I forced myself to get out of bed and walk to the window. I looked outside, but it was too dark to see anything. I waited there for almost an hour, but the forest stayed quiet. I told myself it could have been an animal, a deer maybe, something harmless, but it didn't feel harmless. The next day, I tried to shake it off. I kept busy. I cleaned, walked the perimeter of the cabin, tried to fix a loose board on the porch. But around late afternoon, I found something else. Near the base of the trees, not far from the plywood I had seen the day before, there were footprints. Bare feet. Human. They were deep in the soft dirt. Long toes. Wide heels. I measured one against my boot. Whoever made them had feet bigger than mine. And there were more than just one set. 2, maybe 3. Going in different directions, like someone had been pacing or circling around. I went back to the cabin fast and locked the door behind me. I didn't leave the porch the rest of the day. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing things, soft knocks, rustling, creaks from woods. At some point, I even thought I heard breathing outside my window, but I couldn't be sure. I stayed in bed, wide awake until the sun came up. The last day, I had planned to leave in the morning, but I ended up staying a few more hours. I don't know why. Maybe I was trying to convince myself it had all been in my head. Around noon, I stepped out back to dump out some old coffee, and that's when I saw it. There was something nailed to the tree behind the cabin. It was a rabbit, or what was left of one. It had been cut open, its insides pulled out and arranged on the ground below it. Not eaten, arranged, in a shape, almost like a circle. There was no blood on the ground. It had been cleaned. I froze. My stomach dropped. That wasn't nature. That wasn't random. Someone had done that. And they had done it right behind the cabin while I was inside, probably while I was sleeping. I went inside, locked the door, grabbed my keys, and packed everything up in 5 minutes. I didn't care if I left anything behind. I ran out to my car, and as I backed up the dirt road, I swear I saw someone in the trees to the left. Just a glimpse, tall, unmoving, watching. I didn't stop to look again. I drove down that path as fast as I could without crashing, and once I hit the paved road, I didn't stop for anything. I didn't report it. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want to answer questions I couldn't explain. No one would have believed me anyway. And nothing happened after. I never got any calls, no follow-up from the rental site. I just left a short review and moved on. But every so often, I still wake up in the middle of the night with that feeling again. That stillness, that silence, that thick, dark pressing against the windows. I don't go on solo trips anymore. I don't rent remote cabins. I don't go into the woods alone. I don't need to, because I know what's out there now, and I don't want to ever be near it again. My mom told me this story not too long ago, but it happened about 10 years ago. I wasn't that old when it happened, maybe around 10 or 11, so I didn't know about it at the time. But after she told me, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It wasn't something she told lightly either. My mom's not the kind of person to joke about stuff like this. And our family doesn't talk about ghost stories or weird things. We're not superstitious people, not religious either, and nothing strange had really ever happened to us before. That's what makes it so weird. That's what makes it stick in my head even now. It was about my cousin Amanda. She was 17 when it happened. I remember her. Not too well, but I do. She used to come over sometimes, especially during birthdays or family get-togethers. I mostly remember her being loud in a fun way. She laughed a lot. She had this big, open smile, and she always wore the same red baseball cap with some faded white logo on the front. She had this denim dungaree outfit she wore over a plain white jacket. And when I think of her, that's what she's wearing in my mind. I remember her smell too, kind of like bubblegum and this faint flowery perfume. She wasn't one of those cousins who stayed glued to her phone. She'd play with the little kids, sit with the adults, talk to everyone. I didn't really understand how much people liked her until after she was gone. Amanda died in a car crash. I didn't go to the funeral because my parents said it wasn't something a kid needed to see. I I remember bits of it though. My mom crying a lot, my dad being quieter than usual, and people coming in and out of our house with food and hugs and sad looks. I was too young to get the whole weight of it at the time, but I did know that she wasn't coming back. She had been in the hospital for a while after the crash, maybe a week or two. The accident wasn't right away fatal. I think that's what made it worse. Everyone thought maybe she'd pull through, but then she didn't. The part my mom told me about came after Amanda had died. Our aunt, my dad's sister, had been having her house worked on around that time. It wasn't being torn down or anything, but they were adding another bedroom and redoing part of the kitchen and garage. It was a bit of a mess. She lived with her husband and her 2 kids, little boys who Amanda used to babysit all the time. They adored her. My aunt was working during the day and her husband worked late hours, so construction happened while they were out. Just the crew at the house during the day. After Amanda passed, things kind of slowed down for a while. My aunt didn't rush the construction. I think grief hit her hard. Amanda had been close to her, babysat her kids almost every other weekend, just showed up and helped without asking for anything. I think they had a bond. So, a few weeks after the funeral, things started to pick up again at the house. The crew started working more regularly. Nothing unusual, just normal renovation work. Then one day my aunt got a call while she was at work. One of the construction guys told her that a teenage girl had been walking around the property during the day. He didn't say she was doing anything bad, just walking around quietly, sometimes inside the house, sometimes outside near the garage. He thought maybe she was a relative or a neighbor who didn't know the place was under renovation. But it had been happening more than once. He said he saw her 2 or 3 times in the same week. Never spoke, never caused trouble, just walked around like she belonged there. My aunt was confused. She asked him what the girl looked like, and that's where it got strange. He told her the girl had long brown hair, wore a red baseball cap, denim dungarees, and a white jacket. My aunt nearly dropped the phone. That was Amanda's usual outfit. Exactly. She didn't say anything right away, just thanked him and hung up. She told my uncle about it when she got home and pulled out a photo of Amanda. The same one she had from Amanda's last birthday. A selfie she took holding one of the boys, wearing that same outfit. She took it to the crew the next day and asked if that was the girl they'd seen. They all agreed immediately. That was her. One guy even said, "Yeah, she walked right past me near the back porch a few days ago." But Amanda had been dead for over 3 weeks by then. Now, this is where most stories would say something about ghosts or her spirit checking in or whatever, but that's not where my mom went with it, and it's not where I go with it either. What's disturbing to me is how real the sightings were. These weren't people who knew her or had seen her picture before. They were just guys doing their job. No reason to make up anything or imagine it. They all described the same thing before seeing her photo. My aunt called the police, not because of the paranormal aspect, but because there was someone walking around her house during the day while no one was home. The police came, asked some questions, looked around the property, but there wasn't much they could do. They found no signs of forced entry, nothing stolen or moved. The weirdest part was that one of the workers said the girl had been seen coming out of the garage, but the garage had been locked for weeks. My uncle hadn't even opened it since before the accident. After that, my aunt set up a couple of cameras outside the house. Motion activated once. For a few days, they caught nothing. Just footage of the crew working and a few birds flying around. Then, late one afternoon, the camera near the back porch caught something. Not clearly, just a blur of movement, a shape that could have been a person, but not enough to prove anything. Not enough to even really make sense of. No face, no clear figure, just a smudge that looked like someone walking out of the garage and into the yard. And then it was gone. The workers didn't see her again after that. Maybe the cameras scared whoever was off. Maybe it was someone who resembled Amanda and just wandered onto the property not knowing what kind of mess they were causing. Maybe one of the kids had found an old jacket and hat and was playing dress up outside, even though that doesn't make sense since the sightings were in the middle of the day when no one was home. Maybe someone found Amanda's old clothes somewhere and thought it would be funny to mess with the crew. I don't know. No one does. What sticks with me is how sure the construction guys were. They weren't shaken. They weren't trying to scare anyone. They just thought it was a girl from the neighborhood. That's what makes it creepy. The normalness of it. Like if it really had been Amanda, just walking around like nothing had happened. My aunt packed Amanda's clothes up not long after that and put them in storage. She said she couldn't look at them anymore. She also had the garage door replaced and changed the locks. Nothing ever happened again. No more sightings. No more calls. No more weird shapes on the cameras. The house is finished now. Has been for years. The kids are older. One of them is in college already. But when my mom told me this story, her voice was steady, like she wasn't trying to spook me or get a reaction. She just said it like a fact, something that happened. She still doesn't know what to make of it. No one in our family does. And that's really it. That's what makes the story so unsettling. It's not that something flew off the walls or a light flickered or a voice whispered from behind a door. It's that someone saw a girl walking around who shouldn't have been there. Someone who looked exactly like Amanda, in the same clothes, weeks after she died. No one ever figured out who it really was or how she got into a locked garage. No answers. Just a description that matched a dead girl and a few people who had no reason to lie. After that, my aunt never spoke about it again. Neither did the workers. My mom only told me because something reminded her of it. And now I can't forget it. I keep wondering if there was a real girl walking around that house that looked just like Amanda, or if our minds do strange things with grief, making us see what we're not ready to let go of. Either way, it happened, and it makes me feel cold whenever I think about it. A couple of years ago, my friend Kate asked me to go with her to a party. The party was being thrown by a girl named Susan. Kate had gone to Catholic school with her from elementary through middle school, but once high school started, they drifted apart. Kate ended up going to public school, which is where I met her, and Susan had stayed on the Catholic school track. They still talked once in a while, but they weren't close like they used to be. I guess that's why Kate brought me along. Probably so she wouldn't feel so out of place around Susan's new circle of friends. It was Susan's birthday, and her parents had apparently rented out a cabin for the weekend to celebrate. From what Kate told me, they had done the same thing the year before, and Susan had taken advantage of it by throwing a party behind their backs. That party had been a hit, so this year she decided to do it again. Kate seemed excited about it, but I was a little more hesitant. I didn't know anyone except Kate, and I didn't have the kind of outgoing personality that made it easy to jump into a new group of people. I figured I'd hang close to Kate, have a few drinks, and make the best of it. I also couldn't ignore the horror movie vibes. Teenagers partying in a cabin in the woods, far from town, in the dead of winter. It practically screamed disaster. Kate and I even joked about it on the drive there. We arrived a little after 8 p.m., and it was already pitch black outside. The road getting there was narrow and surrounded by trees, the kind that looked like they'd swallow you whole if you wandered off the shoulder. When we pulled up to the cabin, there were a few cars already parked out front, but not many. We had to use our phone flashlights just to find the walkway up to the front door. The snow on the ground hadn't been shoveled, so we had to trudge through several inches of it, and the cold wind didn't help. Inside, the place looked normal enough. It was warm, the lights were low, music was playing, and there were already at least 20 people mingling around. Susan greeted Kate like they were still best friends, and I got introduced briefly, but then everyone went back to doing their own thing. The cabin had that old wood-paneled interior, a big stone fireplace, though it wasn't lit, and thick curtains drawn over all the windows. A long table in the corner was crowded with bottles and solo cups, and the smell of cheap alcohol hung heavy in the air. For the first hour or so, everything was pretty uneventful. Kate and I stuck together, occasionally making awkward small talk with strangers. We found a couch to sit on for a bit, and I people-watched while sipping a warm beer someone handed me. What I started noticing, though, was this weird divide in the party. There seemed to be two groups. The ones who were clearly Susan's Catholic school friends, dressed kind of preppy, acting overly polite, laughing a little too loud. And then this other group. They were louder, rougher around the edges, and clearly more into drinking than mingling. There was one guy who caught my attention. He had the name of the city we lived in tattooed across his neck in big, messy letters. Kate and I exchanged glances when we saw it. We weren't laughing exactly, but it gave off this vibe that maybe he was trying a little too hard to seem tough. Still, we couldn't help but wonder if he might actually be dangerous. The whole group he came with had that energy, like they weren't there to celebrate a birthday, but just to get drunk and stir things up. At some point, I guess tension started rising. I didn't catch the beginning of it, but from what I gathered later, that rougher group had shown up without bringing anything. No drinks, no food, and we're just going through everyone else's stuff. People started whispering that one of them might be on probation, and someone else said Susan hadn't even invited all of them, just the one girl who brought the rest along. The plan to get them to leave was weirdly simple. One of the Catholic school guys announced that a ranger or caretaker or someone like that was going to be driving by the cabin soon, checking for cars and noise complaints. He made it sound official, like if there were too many people or cars, someone could get into serious trouble. It worked surprisingly. The group grumbled a bit, but they left. There were about 5 guys and 1 girl. I remember feeling relieved. The tension in the room dropped, and people started laughing again. Kate and I stood by the kitchen chatting with a couple of people, when suddenly that same girl who had just left with the group walked back in. She stood near the doorway and loudly said she just wanted to say happy birthday. It didn't sound sincere. It sounded like she wanted everyone to hear her. Before anyone could even process what was happening, we heard a loud, crashing sound from the back of the cabin. It was a window, then another, then yelling. Someone shouted something about people trying to get back in. Glass was breaking, people were screaming, and everything dissolved into chaos. I just stood there frozen. Kate grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the front of the cabin, away from the noise. I couldn't even think. All I remember was someone yelling that at least one of the guys had a gun. That's when it felt real. All the joking about horror movies disappeared in an instant. Most of us stayed inside the main room, too afraid to go anywhere else. A couple of guys went outside to see what was happening, but they came back quickly and said the group had taken off. Apparently, they didn't actually come inside, just broke the windows and screamed threats before running off into the woods. Still, nobody wanted to take any chances. People started packing up and leaving soon after that. I remember 3 girls who had originally planned to stay the night. They had their sleeping bags and backpacks piled in their arms and were heading out the front door when a scream echoed through the trees. All 3 of them jumped and practically sprinted back inside. It turned out the scream was just a new girl arriving. She'd seen her friend outside and screamed in excitement. That kind of summed up the whole night. Too much tension, not enough sense. One of the girls started crying after that. It was just too much. Kate and I stayed behind for a while longer. Susan was clearly shaken, and we didn't want to leave her alone. Most of the people were gone by then. Just a handful stuck around, planning to spend the night in sleeping bags and on couches. Around 2 a.m., we finally left. We debated calling the cops, but nobody wanted to get in trouble. There had been a lot of underage drinking, and Susan was terrified her parents would find out. She said she'd just lie about how the windows got broken, blame it on a tree branch or a deer or something. The drive back was dead silent. Kate and I were both on edge, replaying everything in our heads. I kept staring out the window, half expecting to see someone standing by the road. But we didn't. Nothing happened after that. The group never came back, and nobody got hurt. But it stuck with me. Not because of what actually happened, although it was scary, but because it could have been worse. Way worse. There were a lot of what-ifs. What if someone had a gun and used it? What if someone had gotten too drunk to react in time? What if Susan's parents had walked in during the chaos? It was one of those nights where you look back and realize how close everything came to going horribly wrong. And even though we laughed about it later, there was still this part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that something about that night wasn't just a bad experience. It was a warning. A cabin in the woods, full of teenagers, some drunk, some angry, some completely unaware of the danger they were in. That night was a mess, but it could have easily turned into something much darker. I've never gone back to that area since. I don't think I ever will. I can't believe this story is over 10 years old now. Time really does fly if you're not paying attention. Thinking back on it still gives me this strange, sick feeling in my stomach. It's probably one of the weirdest things that's ever happened to me. And at the time, it was absolutely terrifying. Back then, I had just started dating this girl I was really into. We hadn't been seeing each other for very long, maybe a couple of months, but I was already getting frustrated. She was always busy, Between school, work, and whatever else she had going on, it felt like I was constantly being pushed to the back burner. I still lived at home with my parents, and so did she. So getting alone time wasn't really a thing. We would text and talk on the phone, but seeing her in person felt like pulling teeth. Every time I tried to make plans, she already had something else going on. Eventually, I just got tired of it. One weekend, I told her how I felt. I didn't yell or anything, I just let it out. I told her it felt like I wasn't a priority, that I was getting annoyed and starting to feel like an afterthought. She was quiet for a while and then finally said she understood. But she had already made plans for that weekend. She was going on a camping trip with her friends. That hit me the wrong way. Here I was, trying to fight for just a few hours together, and she was going off for an entire weekend with her friends. I won't lie, I was pretty angry. I was even thinking about breaking up with her before things got too deep. But then, right as she was leaving for the trip, she texted me, said she was sorry again, and that one of her friends had mentioned I could come too if I wanted. It was obviously last minute. I remember staring at the message for a while. I didn't like camping. I still don't. But I figured if I didn't go, I wouldn't see her at all for another week. So I grabbed my bag, tossed in whatever I thought I'd need for a night outdoors, and got in the car. The campsite was only about 40 minutes away, so it wasn't a huge deal. When I got there, I was surprised by what it looked like. It wasn't the deep woods camping I had in my head. It was this large open clearing surrounded by trees, but very clearly a public space. There were probably 20 or 30 other groups there. Some had big RVs, others had tents. It was kind of a mix. The area felt more like a giant picnic field than a wilderness campsite. It didn't feel private at all, and I kind of hated it at first. But I was there to see my girlfriend, not to critique the camping setup. That's when I met her friends for the first time. They were all way more outgoing than she was. Loud, funny, kind of wild. But they seemed like good people. They welcomed me right away, offered me some food, handed me a drink, and just folded me into whatever they were doing. I started to relax a little. After we ate, I wandered a bit and found a bunch of trails that went off into the woods. That was the first time it actually started to feel like camping to me. Those trails went on longer than I expected. There were signs, but they were far apart, and the deeper you went, the more isolated it felt. That night, after it got dark, we grilled some food on a little portable grill someone brought. We sat in camp chairs and played card games under the glow of a few battery-powered lanterns. People were drinking beer out of those stainless steel flasks or cups since open containers weren't allowed. It was chill. Around 11, though, something weird happened. Two people showed up, a man and a woman, both in uniforms. Not like cops, but close. They said they were responsible for managing the campsite and the trails. I guess you call them rangers. They had these big flashlights and were shining them into our tents and around the campfire, kind of aggressively. One of the guys in our group asked what was going on, and the woman snapped that there was a strict 10 p.m. curfew. No lights, no noise, everyone in bed. We all looked at each other like, what? It was a Saturday night, and we were at a public campsite. No one had mentioned any kind of curfew. We weren't being obnoxiously loud. A few of us laughed, thinking they were joking, but they weren't. The woman especially was intense. She raised her voice and started talking to us like we were little kids. Said she'd be doing rounds, and if anyone was still awake next time she came by, they'd be kicked out. We were annoyed, but we didn't want to push our luck. We'd been drinking, and if they kicked us out, none of us were in a position to drive. One of the girls whispered that we could just keep playing cards in her tent quietly, but the ranger overheard and doubled back. Said absolutely no talking, no lights, no nothing. It felt ridiculous, but we went along with it. One by one, people trickled into their tents. It got quiet. I stayed up for a while with my girlfriend. We talked in low voices, just enjoying the rare moment of privacy. Then she leaned in and whispered that we should sneak onto one of the trails. She said it would be the only place we could be alone without anyone telling us to shut up or go to sleep. I hesitated for maybe half a second, then agreed. We slipped out of the tent and crept across the edge of the clearing. We stayed low, trying not to draw attention. Once we were on one of the trails and far enough and that the noise from the main camp had faded, we stopped. It was dark, really dark, but we had a small flashlight with us. The trees were thick on both sides, but the trail was easy enough to follow. We weren't doing anything crazy, just standing close, finally alone, finally able to talk and hold each other without someone barking rules at us. Then we heard it, a sharp voice cutting through the silence. Hey, it wasn't a shout, but it was loud enough that it stopped us cold. We both froze. My heart jumped. It wasn't the voice of a ranger. It sounded different, male, older, and there was something strange in the tone, like it was trying to sound casual, but had a weird edge. We didn't say anything, just stayed still. Then it came again. I know you're here. I just want to say hi. I looked around, trying to see where the voice was coming from. It was hard to tell. Everything looked like shadows. But then I saw him. A man was standing in the middle of the trail. Short, stocky build, wearing a long white t-shirt that looked too big for him. He had a small flashlight in one hand, pointed at the ground. I don't know how he saw us, but when I peeked around the tree, he turned his head like he was waiting for me to look. Our eyes met. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was forced, wide, and wrong. He lifted his other hand and said, "Hey, buddy, I got something for you." My brain was screaming to run, but I was frozen. Then he said something I'll never forget. "I got all this money in my pocket. My ex-wife's gonna take it. I want to give it away before she finds out. Come over here and grab it, would you?" There was nothing in his hand. He just held it out, palm up, like he was expecting me to walk over and take something invisible. He was about 20 feet away, close enough to see, but not close enough to grab us. I looked at my girlfriend and mouthed one word: run. She took off without hesitation. I turned and sprinted after her. As I pushed off, I heard the man shout, "No!" And there was a sudden movement, like he lunged forward. But I didn't look back. We ran full speed through the trail, crashing through brush, and probably stepping on rocks or roots. All I could think about was getting back to the main clearing. When we got back to camp, we went straight to our tent. I was shaking. My girlfriend was trying not to cry. We waited. After about an hour, we saw the rangers again doing a slow walk around. I went up to the woman from before and told her I had seen someone wandering the woods. I lied and said I saw him from the tent. Didn't mention that we had broken curfew and gone on the trail. To my surprise, she took it seriously. She got on the radio and called someone. A few minutes later, a couple of police officers showed up. They asked us some questions, then headed off into the woods with flashlights. They were out there for maybe half an hour. Eventually, they came back and said they didn't find anyone, but they'd keep an eye out. Nothing ever came of it. That was the last I saw of the man. We didn't sleep much the rest of the night. Every sound, every rustle in the trees made me jump. I kept my eyes on the trail for hours, just waiting to see him again. He never came back. To this day, I have no idea who he was, what he wanted, or if he had really been watching us the whole time. But I do know that something about him was deeply wrong. Not just drunk or mentally ill, there was something else. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I never went back to that campsite. I still hate camping. Every summer, when people start talking about going outdoors and setting up tents, my mind drifts back to that night. To that man, that smile, and that awful feeling in my gut that if we had waited even a few more seconds before running, things could have ended very differently. When I was in high school, I had a close friend named Evan who lived 2 houses down from me. We weren't in the same classes, but we hung out nearly every day after school. His house was small but cozy, with that old wood paneling smell and walls that creaked when the wind picked up. I remember his place mostly because of what stood right next to it, a house that, for as long as I could remember, never had the same family for more than a few months. That house was strange. Not in a haunted house kind of way, it was just off. People would move in with smiles and new paint on the walls and furniture being carried inside. A few months later, usually less, they'd vanish. Literally vanish. No for sale signs, no moving trucks, no goodbyes. One day the lights would be on, and the next, the place would be dark and empty again. Over and over. It was like the house just didn't want people to stay. I remember one Saturday night, early December, maybe 9 or 10 p.m., Evan and I were bored. It was cold out, but neither of us wanted to stay in playing Xbox or watching the same movies. So we were just walking up and down his block, bundled up in hoodies, kicking dead leaves, and talking about nothing. That's when Evan brought it up again. The house. He said it had been empty for months now. No cars, no movement, no lights. He said the side gate was always unlocked, and he wanted to go inside, just to see. I was hesitant. I mean, it was trespassing, but I didn't want to be the one who'd chicken out either. So I followed him. We went around the back of the house, using a narrow strip of grass between his fence and the neighbor's side yard. The backyard was plain, patchy lawn, an old wooden deck, and a detached garage that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. The sliding glass door on the back of the house was locked, as expected, but then Evan pointed out the dog door at the bottom. It was bigger than most I'd seen, a rectangle of rubber flaps with scratches all over it. I laughed, not really thinking he'd try it. But sure enough, he dropped to his knees, wriggled his way through, and popped up inside like it was nothing. Then he unlocked the door from the inside and let me in. The air inside was stale. No smell of food, no scent of cleaning products or anything human. Just cold air, dust, and wood. The power was off, so the only light came from a tall street lamp shining through a large picture window in the kitchen. The kitchen itself was old but nice. Real wood cabinets, tile counters, a small built-in breakfast nook with a wooden bench and table under the window. We walked through the first floor, just kind of poking around. The furniture was all gone, but there were signs of people having lived there. Nail holes in the walls, scuff marks on the baseboards, even a couple of forgotten toys in one of the closets. We ended up sitting in the kitchen, cross-legged on the tile floor, facing that breakfast table. It was so quiet in there you could hear the ticking of my watch. We weren't really talking about anything important, just school, music, random stuff. We weren't even using flashlights, just sitting there in the semi-darkness, that streetlight casting long shadows through the window and onto the floor. That's when everything went wrong. I don't remember any warning. I didn't hear a sound, didn't feel anything change. 1 second I was looking at Evan, and the next everything went black. But it wasn't just my sight. My entire body felt like it had been dropped into freezing water. My skin burned with cold, but not from air. It was like something had poured inside me. My chest tightened, and I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or shut. I remember opening my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My tongue felt frozen. My limbs were heavy. I couldn't tell where I was or if I was still sitting down. My body felt hollow and full at the same time, like something was pushing against my insides. Then I felt Evan's hand grab mine hard, really hard. He yanked me, dragging me in some direction, and I didn't resist. I couldn't even think. My body just followed. I stumbled after him, blind and freezing, my shoes slipping on the floor or maybe outside, I didn't even know. Then light. My vision came back slowly, like someone was turning up the brightness on a screen. The cold didn't leave all at once. It crawled out of me, inch by inch, until I was shivering in a way that felt more natural. We were outside, under the street lamp. The light from it looked yellow and almost soft, like a warm blanket compared to what I just felt. I was bent over, trying to catch my breath, my teeth chattering. Evan was standing there, wide-eyed, like he couldn't believe what just happened. He didn't speak, and neither did I. Not for a long time. Eventually, I asked him what had happened. He hesitated, then told me. He said while I was talking, something moved under the table. Not like a shadow or an animal. He said it was a figure, a girl, maybe, but all black. Not like someone wearing black, but black like empty space. No face, no eyes, no mouth. It crawled out slowly and sat right on top of me. He said I didn't react. My eyes were open, but I looked blind. I was groping the air like I couldn't tell, where I was like I'd gone completely disconnected from the room around me. That's when he grabbed me and pulled me out. I didn't say much in response. What was there to say? I didn't see anything, but I felt it. Whatever that blackness was, it wasn't just in my head. I wasn't imagining it. The cold was too real. The pressure in my chest, the heaviness in my limbs, I couldn't explain it away. The walk home was quiet. I didn't sleep that night. I kept my lamp on, pulled the covers up to my chin, and stared at the corner of my room for hours. I couldn't stop thinking about it. For days after, I had this unsettled feeling, like I was forgetting something important, like something was still with me, just out of reach. I kept looking over my shoulder, jumping at random noises, and flinching every time the furnace kicked on. The worst part was how normal everything looked the next day. The house next door was still there, still empty, still quiet. It didn't look like anything had happened, but I couldn't go near it. Even walking on the same side of the street made my skin crawl. I avoided it completely after that. Years have passed since that night. Evan and I are still friends, though we don't bring it up much. When we do, it's brief. Just a look or a short comment, like we're both afraid talking about it too much might make it come back. I still don't know what exactly happened in that house. I don't have an explanation, but know what I felt, and I know it wasn't normal. It wasn't a ghost or anything like that. It was something deeper, something that made my body shut down and my brain go numb. Something I never want to feel again. That house still stands. New people move in. They leave. Always within 6 months. I don't ask questions anymore. I don't want to know. And I never went back inside. Not once.